My pen, and I've got another one rolled around here somewhere. On my writing utensils, I may have to borrow. Usually I keep an extra one, but not always. Darlene. According to my watch, we are at the 3 o'clock hour, and seeing as how our agenda is really quite packed, we'll go ahead and get started. Chair Lady Taylor, would you mind opening us up in a quick word of prayer, please? What number is she?
The day that you've given us, we ask for your blessings and guidance as we make decisions that affect the people and the citizens of the state of Georgia. We ask for discernment and understanding and fairness in all that we do. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you very much. Today we begin the first of, not sure exactly how many, but will be of more hearings relating to what the speaker has tasked us with, and that's looking into any issues from the June 9th elections and to see if we can find ways in which we can do better as a state. Just have been asked if, to do the best we can, as hard as it may be when it comes to elections, to shed our politics and look for real solutions to improve what has been referred to as the shared partnership that we see across our state. We have a number of folks set to testify today, 16 in fact. We have scheduled them all. Most are coming in via Zoom. I'd ask the committee to try to keep the questions to a minimum. We've allocated 10 minutes to each speaker, which 3 to 5 for them to speak and 3 to 5 for us to question. And we are going to try to stick to that as we proceed in order to keep a reasonable schedule and not keep anyone here too terribly late. Seeing as it is a long day, just want to start off by thanking you and ask if there are any initial comments or any initial thoughts from Representative Nguyen.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank you for entering this into this with an open mind and with a sense of fairness, and making sure that we have representation from across the state as we kind of navigate what we need to do moving forward to improve our elections. So I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you very much. We have it broken down just so that everyone knows. We will hear from poll observers first. We have some poll managers, some citizens, and then we get into some of the election supervisors and elections board members later in the hour. So the staff is ready. We will go ahead and zoom in our first scheduled testimony of the day, and that is Ms. Chafee. She's a poll observer from Greene County. I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
No, that's correct. Thank you very much. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about what I observed while poll watching in Greene County on June 9th. My name is Michelle Chafee, and I served as a poll watcher at Greensboro polling location. I arrived at the polling location at 6 a.m. Social distancing signage was in place. At 6:50 a.m., there were 8 voters in line. 3 were allowed into the enclosed space to vote. All 3 said that they received an error stating their card couldn't be read when they placed it into the poll pad. The poll workers attempted to fix the problem. 2 voters left and said that they could not wait. I did not see them return, and I was there until the polls closed that evening at 7 p.m. At 7:25 a.m., the poll workers told voters they could vote using paper ballots. I quickly noticed a pattern of African American voters being told they had requested absentee ballots after their ID was scanned. Most said they had not requested or received absentee ballots. They were told they had to go to the office to fill out a paper before they could vote. Some of those voters returned and some did not. When those voters did return, the scanner would not accept their ballots, so they were given provisional ballots. I saw some of the paper ballots that were not accepted in the scanner folded up and placed on a counter. Shortly after 9 a.m., the poll pads were working, so paper ballots were no longer used. At 5:45 p.m., A Caucasian woman was told she had requested an absentee ballot when her ID was scanned. And she confirmed she had in fact requested a ballot and received it, but that she had not sent it in. She was asked to fill out a paper to cancel that absentee ballot. She said she didn't need to fill out that paper because she had already been there in the morning and canceled it. The poll worker let her vote, even though it indicated in the system she had not canceled her ballot. When I asked the poll worker if they needed to verify that she had canceled her absentee ballot, I was told by the poll worker that she knew the woman, so it was fine. At around 6:45 p.m., an African-American woman and her daughter came in to vote. When the woman got to the poll pad, she called for help and said that she had the wrong ballot as it was a Republican ballot instead of a Democratic ballot. The poll worker told her she could just use the Republican ballot and leave things blank if she didn't want to choose a candidate. She respectfully said again that she wanted a Democratic ballot. The poll worker appeared to be exasperated and said she had already tallied the machines. The poll worker tried to cancel the woman's ballot with the help of another poll worker. At this point, I went into the hallway to see if there was anybody else in line to vote. I was standing approximately 25 feet from the door to the enclosed space when the woman and her daughter came out and began walking toward the building exit. I approached them, introduced myself, and asked if she was able to cast her vote on the ballot she requested. Just as she was answering me, the poll worker that was attempting to cancel the voter's initial ballot came down the hall very upset, telling me I could not talk to the voters. I explained I could talk to the voters outside of the enclosed space. She insisted I could not and proceeded to follow us to the door and continued telling us we were not to speak to one another. Every time I or the voter attempted to talk, she interrupted and said we could not speak to one another. She continued to do this even when we were outside the building. I then called an attorney with the poll observation program, and he asked me to put him on speaker. He explained to the poll worker that I was able to talk to the voters outside the enclosed space. She again insisted I could not. She went to get the poll superintendent, who also said I could not talk to the voters even outside the enclosed space. The attorney read the statute that indicates poll watchers are able to talk with voters outside the enclosed space, and the poll workers finally went inside the building. I was then able to talk to the voters, who thanked me for helping them.
Thank you, Ms. Chafee. Are there any questions for this person? I don't see any. I want to thank you for zooming in with us today, and thank you for your testimony. Excuse me, we do have one question, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was Greene County, because of the delay in voting and the poll pads not working on time, was Greene County one of the counties that actually received extension on voting time?
No.
I'm not aware. I'm going to let her.
Oh, yeah, the voting closed at 7 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry if I missed this before. What was the time of the first voter who was actually able to cast their ballot or any form of ballot?
7:25 was when they were told they could start using paper ballots.
That's my fault, Ms. Chafee. If you could repeat that, I'm getting used to this.
Oh, that's okay. 7:25 was when the poll workers told the voters they were going to start using paper ballots.
Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Was the mother and daughter, were they able to vote?
They did say that they were able to cast a ballot. I've tried to, I don't know if that was a provisional ballot or if it was the proper Democratic ballot that they requested.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Chafee, have you ever been a poll worker before this election?
I have not.
Did you hear that question, Ms. Chafee?
I did not, and I want to clarify, I was a poll watcher, not a poll worker, but I have not been either before.
Follow up? Ms. Chafee, how did you come to find out or be asked or get interested in being a poll observer for this election?
I believe I got an email from the Democratic Party of Georgia. I just actually moved to Georgia in March, and I received an email saying that, you know, there were opportunities to help get out the vote, and that's how I came to know about it.
Representative Jones? Representative Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am, for just being here with us today. You said at 9 o'clock they began to use the machines to use the ballot marking device in the poll. They stopped using the paper ballots. Did they tell you why or what was the problem that they rectified at 9 a.m.?
No, they did not. I didn't ask either, but I wasn't aware. I just knew that they moved to the electronic system at that time.
Representative Oliver, number 6.
Welcome to Georgia, Ms. Chafee. Thank you for volunteering.
Oh,
You
thank you.
described a voter being told to go to the office. What office did that refer to?
You know, I'm not certain of that either. I don't know for sure if it was an office at some other part of the building. At one point, I heard a poll worker talk about them getting in their car to drive. I don't know if that was just to another part of the building or somewhere else. I didn't ask. As I was sitting there observing, I didn't want to disrupt anything, and it was slightly chaotic at that point. So I'm not sure exactly where the office was, but I know they had to leave the enclosed space. And I did document at what time one of the voters who was told that left and came back, and it was approximately 20 minutes later.
Yes, yes,
Collins, last question.
yes. Thank you again for being here with us through Zoom today. Would you find that your experience as a poll observer with the precinct manager there, would you say that that person exhibited leadership skills and was able to work through those problems effectively and efficiently?
The person that I believe was the poll manager was certainly doing her best, and I believe that she took it as a high priority to make sure things were moving and people were able to vote. It did seem like maybe she wasn't prepared for the technology that wasn't working properly.
Ms. Chafee, we appreciate your service and we greatly appreciate you zooming in with us today. Thank you for your testimony.
Mhm.
Next, we have a Miss Fee Nguyen. Believe some relation. Would you like to introduce the next?
Mr. Chair, the next person we have is my baby sister who actually went to law school, and she's a lawyer in the family. I was the black sheep. And so she is a litigator with Asian Americans Advancing Justice and served as a poll worker. She's currently at the beach with my family. I'm here, but I'm here.
Not fair. Ms. Nguyen, are you ready?
I am ready. Good afternoon, Chairman Blackman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard today. Again, my name is Fee Nguyen, and I'm the litigation director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. And just one point of clarification, I actually worked as a poll watcher, not a poll worker, on election day. On election day, our office ran both an in-language voter hotline and a poll monitoring program, as we've done over the last 5 years. This year, we primarily monitored precincts in Gwinnett County, but also deployed volunteers and staff to certain precincts in DeKalb County and Fulton County that were reported to be experiencing significant problems throughout the day. I will talk about the problems that we witnessed at the polls on election day, but I think we have to start by addressing some of the ways that the state had already failed Georgia voters long before June 9th. And I want to start first by talking about absentee ballots. Though Secretary Raffensperger called on all Georgians to vote by mail in light of the pandemic, neither he nor any other state or county elections officials took any measures whatsoever to ensure that voting by mail was accessible to the hundreds of thousands of limited English proficient or LEP voters in Georgia. Despite the increasingly diverse electorate in Georgia, Secretary Raffensperger's press release calling on Georgians to vote by mail was in English only, as is all voting information provided on the Secretary of State's website, as were all the absentee ballot applications that Secretary Raffensperger mailed to voters. Even in Gwinnett County, where federal law requires that elections be conducted completely bilingually in English and in Spanish. But when voting rights groups brought this misstep to the attention of Secretary Raffensperger and the Gwinnett County Board of Elections, what did they do? They pointed fingers at each other. Not it, not our responsibility, not our problem. A clear violation of Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, yet our leaders were not willing to accept the responsibility for the harm to the 14,000 LEP Spanish-speaking voters in Gwinnett County. And the data shows that there was harm. The data shows that only 3.2% of Latina active voters applied for an absentee ballot in Gwinnett County, as compared to 15.2% of white active voters. And of course, as you are all now aware, there were other widespread problems associated with the absentee ballot application and issuance process. We heard from voters in Gwinnett County, Fulton County, Cobb County, and DeKalb County who requested absentee ballots weeks and weeks before the election, but either never received their ballots or received them too late. So instead of being able to vote safely from their homes in the midst of a pandemic, these voters were forced to wait in line for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours on election day. Some understandably gave up and went home. Some were wrongly told that they had to vote provisionally. And we know that these were not isolated experiences. According to a statement made by Secretary Raffensperger 5 days before the election, over 1.5 million Georgians had requested an absentee ballot, but as of that date, only 800,000 had voted by mail. What happened to the hundreds of thousands of other voters who requested an absentee ballot? Instead of wasting time laying blame and pointing fingers, Secretary Raffensperger, county elections officials, and this body should all accept responsibility and work together to prevent the same scenarios from replaying during any runoff elections in August or during the general election in November. This is your collective obligation and opportunity, and I see this hearing as a good starting place. For example, this body could act to extend the deadline for receipt of absentee ballots. Several voting rights groups, including Advancing Justice, urged Secretary Raffensperger and elections officials to do so for the June primaries, but they ignored this request. This body could also require and provide funding for absentee ballot drop-off locations in every county. This would increase convenience to voters and minimize the risk that absentee ballots are not timely received through no fault of the voter. And I do want to talk about what we saw on election day. We witnessed or had reported to us machine issues at several precincts in DeKalb County, Fulton County, and Gwinnett County. At some sites, machines were down for hours, and there did not appear to be uniformity in how different precincts handled machine failures or other technical issues. Some told voters to come back, while others allowed voters to vote provisionally, which leads to my next point. There has got to be a concerted effort by you, by the Secretary of State, and by county elections officials to ensure that poll workers are adequately trained. Year after year, we witness poll workers giving inaccurate information or following erroneous procedures that at best inconveniences voters and at worst completely disenfranchises them. And I want to be clear, I am neither blaming poll workers nor suggesting that they intentionally obstruct voters. For the most part, I see them working very hard, and I believe that they want to get it right. And I know that none of us gets it right all the time. But when the cost of a poll worker's mistake is a person's right to vote, it's incumbent upon you and upon the Secretary of State and all county elections officials to invest in poll worker training and to do everything in your power to minimize the rate of error. I want to bring up one last point one last issue that we encountered. We far too often see voters who show up at the same place they've always voted, only to be told on election day that their polling place has changed. And we understand that the pandemic led to significant staffing shortages this year that required last minute changes to polling sites and polling site closures. But the reality is inadequate notice to voters about polling place changes has been something that we've seen year after year. And receiving a notice in the mail a week after the election that your polling location has changed does absolutely nothing for anyone. There have got to be more effective and timely ways to communicate to voters about changes in their polling locations. There's a lot more that I could say, but I understand that you have a lot of people to hear from. So I thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. You do have a couple of questions. We have a couple of minutes left. So Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counselor, you said, as I wrote down, year after year, we have witnessed poll workers giving incorrect information to voters. Can you tell me some of these previous instances before this election that you've witnessed that?
Sure. I think that there is often some confusion about when provisional ballots should be utilized. I know in 2018, for instance, there was an issue with voters being told that they could vote provisionally, even though they were out of county, only to be told later that because they weren't in the right county, their votes wouldn't count at all. There were also—
And you witnessed this?
I don't remember now if I personally witnessed that on the ground, but I also helped run a voter hotline in 2018. And so that was certainly an issue that we fielded. So either I personally did or one of our volunteers did.
Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One is, are you a worker or an observer?
I am an observer.
Are you a volunteer or are you compensated?
I am compensated by my organization. I work at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta, but I'm not compensated specifically to be a poll monitor.
You're not paid by the county?
I am not.
And who is the hotline for that? I wanted to get the name of who the organization was.
It's called Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. I know it's a mouthful.
Follow up. Have you, how many times have you worked at the polls and done this type of work?
Our organization has done this for 5 years. I started with the organization in 2017, so 3 years.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Let's see, is Representative Williams, is it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is about paper ballots that were given when when the machines were not working? Is she, okay. So I'm wondering, was it your understanding that people were given provisional paper ballots when the machines were not working, or were they given emergency ballots?
My understanding that physically, and one of you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe provisional ballots look the same, but that the difference is provisional ballots that are given because a machine is down are supposed to be counted automatically, whereas provisional ballots, which are given because somebody is not on the voter rolls or they're in the wrong county, are not automatically counted but have to be followed up. The voter has to follow up to ensure that the ballot is subsequently counted. But so I don't actually appreciate a difference in the physical form that's given.
Okay, thank you. The reason I asked that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, in Cobb County, our elections director confirmed that in some precincts, staff were confused and were using provisional ballots as emergency ballots, even though she had supplied them with a separate emergency ballot. So I was just curious about the precincts that they were watching. Thank you.
Ms. Nguyen, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your service and appreciate your time. We are ready to move on. Next, we'll be hearing from Ms. Sophie Shepherd and Ms. Joanna Shepherd out of Chatham County. And I will mention real quick, don't be too hard on me. You can only have either Zoom alive or your mic live at once. So I have to toggle between the two. And I'm moving as quick as I can. But we have Ms. Shepherd and Ms. Shepherd. We turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about what I observed while poll watching in Chatham County on June 9th with my daughter, Sophie, who will also address you in a moment. My name is Joanna Shepherd, and I served as a poll watcher at the Salvation Army precinct at 3000 B Road in Savannah. Although I have never served as a poll watcher before, I participated in training sessions to prepare and have some knowledge of voting law, as I'm a law professor at Emory University. We observed problems in 4 primary areas in Chatham County. There were multiple issues with the voting equipment, violations of the provisional ballot guidelines, several instances of poll workers not following COVID precautions, and because of these issues, there were very long lines that led to voters leaving before casting a vote. We arrived at the polling location at 6 a.m. For the next 2 hours, the poll workers struggled to set up the 14 voting stations that had been delivered to the location. The poll workers did not have enough information or training to understand how to set up the machines. In addition, the building, which was an old gym, did not have adequate electrical outlets to even plug in the 14 machines. Although the polling location was supposed to open at 7 a.m., the first voter did not begin to cast a vote until 8:11 a.m. At that time, they had 4 of the voting machines operational. Because of malfunctioning equipment, however, it took another hour for 5 voters to have completed their voting. Throughout the morning, the poll workers continued to have problems with the ballot marking devices. At 10 a.m., a technician from the county elections office came and was able to get 6 of the 14 ballot marking devices to work. The other 8 machines never worked at any time before I left at 1 p.m. In addition, the poll pads and voter access cards continued to malfunction. At one point in the middle of the morning, at least 25% of the voters had voter access cards that were unreadable by the ballot marking devices. So they kept having to return to the poll pads to reprogram their cards over and over. I also observed poll workers violate precautions meant to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The poll workers lined up the voters within a foot or 2 of each other, ignoring 6-foot social distancing guidelines. In addition, the poll manager often did not wear a mask as she struggled to fix machines and calm the very frustrated voters. Now Sophie will discuss a few of the issues that we saw.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I also appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about my poll watching experience. in Chatham County. My name is Sophie Shepherd, and I too served as a poll watcher at the Salvation Army polling location in Savannah. I have never worked as a poll watcher before this election, but I also participated in training sessions prior to June 9th. In addition to the malfunctioning equipment and disregard for COVID precautions, I also witnessed unlawful provisional ballot practices. I observed multiple voters who were turned away without receiving a provisional ballot, even though the voters believed they were registered to vote in Chatham County. On one occasion, an elderly Black woman was turned away after waiting in the 2-hour line, even though she insisted she had voted at the polling location for 30 years. I took down her contact information, and our voter protection hotline called her after she left to explain her right to vote by provisional ballot. She returned about an hour later, waiting in the hours-long line again, and asked for a provisional ballot. The poll manager again refused to give her one. At that point, we showed the poll manager the provisional ballot guide prepared by the Secretary of State and explained which scenario the woman fit, which clearly indicated that she should be given a provisional ballot. The poll manager refused, in violation of the law and the Secretary of State's own guidelines, and gave the woman only a voter registration application. The woman left without casting a vote. In the 7 hours I worked at the poll workers did not allow a single voter to vote by provisional ballot, even though they turned away multiple voters because they did not believe they should vote at that precinct. Because of the equipment problems and issues with provisional ballots, the lines at the polling location grew very long. For most of the morning, voters waited over 2 hours to vote, and we observed multiple voters leaving because they were tired of waiting. I have no idea how many people left from the outside line or never got out of their car in the first place when they saw the long line. Thank you.
Thank you both. Do you mind answering a couple of questions?
Of course.
Representative Turner.
Thank you to both of you for your work and for being here today. We genuinely appreciate it. My question was, you said at one point during your testimony that 8 of the machines never worked when you left in the early afternoon. Do you know why? Was it, you had mentioned a power issue. Was it related to power or was it some other malfunction?
I'm not, it seemed like the poll workers weren't, when we got there, they were trying to figure out how to plug things in the first place, and they were reading paper and didn't, but this says goes here. They didn't really seem to understand how to plug the things in. And then when the person from the county came, the technician, he was able to get 6 of them working, and I'm not sure why he didn't do the other 8. I think that there probably wasn't enough outlets. It was an old gym, and there were not that many outlets, and they were very spread out. I do know at some point earlier, one of the poll workers had driven to Home Depot to buy an extension cord to try to help. So I presume it was about the electrical outlets, but I also know that the workers weren't clear about how to get the existing ones up and running either.
The Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. Thank you for your testimony. Do you have a sense of when those machines were actually delivered to the polling location?
They were delivered to the polling location before we got there at 6 a.m. So I don't know when before 6 a.m., but they were there before any of the poll workers were there to set up.
Representative Shannon.
Mr. Chair, I've just got a quick question. The African-American woman that you mentioned that was turned away and not given a provisional ballot, did you hear that conversation? Can you inform us of why they said she would not be able to vote?
Yeah, so we heard it both the first time and the second time. And the second time is when we approached the poll manager and showed her the provisional ballot guidelines we had. And I kept saying, I'm pretty sure this woman fits this second scenario. She's quite confident she's registered to vote. You can at least give her a provisional ballot. And the poll manager first told me, oh, I forgot I had those provisional ballots over there, because she didn't hand out a single one the entire time we were there. But then she said she shouldn't vote because I can't find her on the registration list. So.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. So they maintain that she was not an active voter, is what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's what she said.
And so they gave her a voter registration form to fill out instead of a provisional ballot.
Two more questions. Representative Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service and providing this great service to all of us and getting us this information. Where did you, I know you're an attorney, but you said you received training before you became the observer. Did you receive in-depth, or is this knowledge that you already had?
No, the Democratic Party ran several kind of online training programs for people who were poll watching. Most of them were, well, I think some were live, some were recorded, so that we could just kind of understand the process and, you know, what to expect, what the machines were, the names of all the very complicated machines and that sort of thing. So that's what we watched.
Do you think that it was adequate and you felt comfortable with that? You had
Well, we were poll watchers, not poll workers. So as poll watchers, it was enough to understand when things were clearly going wrong. I don't have any idea what kind of training the poll workers received, so I couldn't comment on that. From what we observed, I would say they didn't understand how to set up the machines, but I can't really comment beyond that.
Thank you.
Representative Collins?
Yes, thank you both for being here with us and joining us today. I wanted to make it very clear. Is it your opinion that those machines weren't hooked up and checked out prior to Election Day, from what I'm understanding?
I think that those machines, although they might have worked, technically they might have worked, the county didn't look at the specific polling place to check that they had adequate infrastructure, specifically the outlets, to make sure that the machines would actually work on election day. So if they had checked the polling location to ensure that there were adequate outlets, I think things would have gone a lot better, but they didn't do that.
Yeah, and I would agree. My understanding is I don't think there's any way those 14 could have all worked in that location.
Well, thank you both. Appreciate your work and your service, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Sticking with our schedule, from Fulton County, from Floyd County next, we have a Miss Danielle Nguyen. Ms. Nguyen, are you with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Greetings, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I am Danielle Nguyen, and I served as a poll observer in Floyd County, Precinct 75 in Rome, Georgia. The Secretary of State's office knew well before June 9th that there would be way more people than ever before coming to polling locations with absentee ballot issues. But none of the poll workers were prepared for this obvious scenario at my polling location. There was inadequate training regarding voters who came in with absentee ballots and those who had requested them. When I arrived at 1 p.m., 6 hours after voting seemingly started, it was immediately clear that poll workers were confused and were confusing voters with absentee ballot issues. Two scenarios were most common. First were voters who requested but never received or voted their absentee ballots. Second were voters who arrived with completed absentee ballots, believing they could simply give those ballots to the poll workers at their polling location. In both scenarios, where the voters are legally allowed to request that their absentee ballots be canceled at the polling location and proceed to vote regularly in person, voters were instead told that the poll workers did not know what they should do, and at least 18 voters left without casting their votes. I also observed the poll manager redirect voters in line who were in the correct polling location to go to a different polling locations to vote. Several voters actually returned to tell the poll manager at my location, which initially was their correct location, that they had been turned away at the polling location to which they had been sent to. Due to misinformation given back and forth, many voters just opted to leave without voting. There was an issue of inadequate supply of provisional ballots and a refusal to provide additional ballots. My polling location did not have sufficient provisional ballots, and poll workers instructed at least 20 voters to go to another location in the county without offering them a provisional ballot as requested by the statute and the Secretary of State's own provisional voter guide that should have been provided to voters. Around 3 p.m., despite the fact that the polling location did not have any remaining Democratic provisional ballots, the county informed the poll manager that no additional ballots would be delivered. Voters who wanted to vote Democratic ballots instead ended up voting in the Republican primary because polling officials would not provide a Democratic ballot. There were faulty machines, which resulted in voters not voting at my location. At about 1:30 p.m., 2 of the 4 ballot marking devices were out of commission, and the printer on one of the 2 remaining BMDs was down. I observed multiple voters leaving the polling location without voting. Just as concerning, poll workers told multiple voters to go vote in a different polling location without telling them that they will not be able to vote a full ballot at the incorrect polling location. Then around 2:40 p.m., another ballot marking device went out of service, leaving the entire location with only 1. This led to lines of over an hour to 4-hour wait. And because the polling location did not have a sufficient number of Democratic Party provisional ballots, but they did have plenty of no party provisionals, multiple voters who needed to vote provisionally after waiting in line for more than an hour were told that there are no additional ballots and turned away by poll workers without voting. Shortly thereafter, a second BMD was brought back online, but both BMD printers began malfunctioning and giving error codes. From my observations, I found that the poll workers and voters were cornered into a situation that left them in a state of frustration, uncertainty, and chaos that was inexcusable. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of the committee for your time and attention in allowing me to share my experience with you today. That is the conclusion of my experience.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. And you were fortunate. You do not have any questions. So we are grateful that you were willing to join us today. We appreciate your service and thankful for your comments here today.
Thank you.
I take that back, Ms. Nguyen. Did somebody have a question? All right, we have one question if you're still there, Ms. Nguyen.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. You had mentioned that at one point the BMDs kept going down and you were left with one operational ballot marking device in that precinct. Did you gain an understanding of why or what the nature of the failure or failures were in the other machines?
I do know that I observed that the machines were giving some type of error code. It was not reading the printers that were needed to after they voted. That wasn't reading together or something, so it would just have a lockdown screen where you could not do anything at all. And the poll workers that were there were just not knowledgeable of how to fix that or how to bypass that to get it back going again. So once that failed, it was just one that was operating correctly until the county eventually did send a technician. But this, when I came in the afternoon, this was hours later. They have already been 6 hours into voting. And then later on, when I got there, like 4 o'clock, then the technician showed up. That the county
Was the technician able to rectify the problem and get the machines working again?
He was able to get 3 of the machines back up and running, yes, while he was there. And shortly after he left, 1 went down again. And then they were left with just 3.
Thank you, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. Do you, Ms. Nguyen, do you have an idea of how many provisional or paper ballots that particular precinct had on hand?
On hand, Democratic provisional ballots, 0, none. There were absolutely no Republican ones at all. And all there was mostly was just no party provisional ballots. And it was about, I would say they were just strewn on a table, and there were about 7 or 8 of those that were just laying on, sitting on the table. But there was, at first they did have Republican ballots, provisional ballots. And then once they ran out of those, there was nothing else. They were just telling people there's no ballots. And then the county, when they called up there to the county office, they were told that they were not going to deliver anymore.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I must, do you know how many they had to begin with before they ran out of paper ballots or provisional ballots for either party ballot?
To begin with, I was not there at the opening of the polls. So at the first, all I could go by is what the poll manager told me once I introduced myself to her as an observer, that she stated that they only had a few, but she did not give me a precise number. She said, we have a few Republican ballots and we had a few Democratic ones somewhere, but I cannot find them. And then we have no party provisional ballots. That is what was told to me by the poll manager.
Well, thank you again, Ms. Nguyen. Have a nice afternoon, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Jacoria Borders from Fulton County. Ms. Borders, are you with us?
I'm with you. Can you hear me? Y'all
We can. You may proceed. Thank you.
Awesome. Chairman Blackman, committee members, I want to thank you all for allowing me to address the committee today. I am Jacoria Borders, and my experience as a Fulton County poll worker for the June 9th primary election deeply troubled me. I appreciate this committee that you all are investigating this election, and I am hopeful that by sharing my experience, it will help you identify what changes need to be made so that what happened on June 9th never, ever happens again in Georgia. The AJC got it right. This election was a complete catastrophe. What I experienced was a complete meltdown, but a real opportunity for redemption and hope among Georgians in zip code 30331. From what I saw, there were 3 things about the primary election that I'd like to highlight in my statement today. First, Fulton County did not have enough poll workers in place to run this election. The county was still hiring poll workers the day before the election, and I was one of them. I was sent a link to the online training videos less than 16 hours before the election. I was given my assigned location at 7:30 p.m. the night before the election, and I was told to arrive at 7 a.m. the same time polls opened on election day. Secondly, the absentee ballot process needs to be refined. My polling location manager spent 95% of her time calling what she stated as downtown in order to cancel ballots, absentee ballots that never arrived to voters before election day. This prompted even longer lines and excruciating wait times for voters who had already waited up to 4 hours in line outside to vote. Third, the training we received was not sufficient. Poll workers didn't know basic election procedures. There were questions on how to handle voters who requested absentee ballots but never received them. There were questions when our poll pass told us that some voters were in the wrong location, even though the Secretary of State's My Voter page directed them to our precinct. And there was a confusion among voters when the polls closed at 7 p.m., but we still had over 100 people in line, some of whom had been waiting for 3 hours or more to vote. Let me start by sharing with you how I was hired just the day before the election. I was concerned that that elections would be a mess. Although I have never served as a poll worker, I am familiar with the voting process in Georgia, in part because I worked for Stacey Abrams for governor in 2017 and 2018. I knew that because of COVID-19, there were going to be fewer polling locations and fewer poll workers. Despite the statewide push for vote by mail, I understood many people, especially in the Black community, feel more comfortable voting in person on election day. And it is clear to me that as a result, there would be long lines and no matter how many people voted by mail. So when on Saturday before the election, I saw an Instagram post that Fulton County needed an additional 250 workers, I felt that it was my duty to help. I had already planned on being a line warmer on election day to support people waiting in line by passing out water and to encourage folks in my community to stay in line. But instead, I responded to the Instagram post and emailed the contact provided by the to work the polls on election day. I want to note that I signed up on Fulton County's website to be a poll worker after my experience during early vote last month, but never heard anything back. All of this doubles down on the need for resources and support to our counties from the state election board and from the Office of the Secretary of State. On Monday, June 8th, the day before the election, I received a couple emails from a temp agency called Happy Faces. To be honest with you, I thought this was spam at first until I Googled the company and realized that it was working on behalf of Fulton County. I filled out an online form and was hired. Before I was even assigned a polling location or told what I would be doing, I received an email from the county with links to training videos. That was at noon on June 8th, only 19 hours before the election. It wasn't until that evening around 7:30 p.m., less than 12 hours before the election, that I received for the first time my assigned polling place, the William Walker Recreation Center. On the Monday night before the election, I stayed up until 3 a.m. watching training videos. There was a lot of information to understand and process and remember just hours before the election. I learned that some poll workers didn't even have time to watch the videos and they showed up to their precinct without any training at all. It was a recipe for disaster. When I arrived at the William Walker Recreational Center the next day at 6:40 a.m. with about 2 hours of sleep, there was a line wrapped around the building, which is so exciting. However, when I went inside, I quickly realized we were in for some trouble. Poll workers were still trying to get the ballot marking devices, printers, poll pads, and everything up and running, and those setting them up were struggling. There were papers everywhere. By the time the polling place opened for voters, I was only able to get one poll pad up and running, slowing down the entire check-in process until I was able to switch off with another poll worker to take my place as I focused on getting the other 2 poll pads up and running around 8 a.m. At this time, the person working the ballot marking devices was a little flustered in getting all the machines and printers fully functional. And throughout the day, we had technical issues with ballot cards. Some voters' cards just didn't work, and we had to reprogram them 3 and 4 times. I personally had 2 cases of this, which ended in one gentleman storming out and giving up on his basic right to vote. During these opening technology issues, the lines continued to get longer and longer. And I want to add, it wasn't just technical problems that slowed us down. We were also slowed down by the lack of training of how to officially run this primary election. One of the biggest problems on June 9th was handling voters who requested but never received their absentee ballots. This was the heartbreak of the day, and it is something that we must fix before November. I received 2 different sets of instructions about how to handle these voters. For the first 2 hours, voters flagged by the poll pads as having requested an absentee ballot and went into a separate line once they came inside. There, they waited for the poll manager to call the elections office to cancel their absentee ballot and to sign an affidavit, and only then were they allowed back in the line to vote. But not all voters who had requested absentee ballots were flagged by the poll pads. Some voters told us that they requested an absentee ballot but never got them, but the poll pads did not flag them. We were told these voters were fine to create ballots for and didn't require a call. Then later, I was given new directions and I was told to send everybody who said they had requested an absentee ballot, whether a poll pad flagged them or not, to the poll manager. But it still didn't account for those who didn't disclose that they requested an absentee ballot. Soon, a long line formed of those who had requested ballots but never received them inside the precinct, and it remained long all day. The poll manager struggled throughout the day to get through to the elections office to cancel absentee ballots, so voters just had to sit and wait until she could. In addition to the up to 3 hours many waited in line, these voters waited an additional at least 45 minutes, with some waiting even longer. Our poll manager did the very best she could, and I want to be clear about that. This was not her fault, and we cannot blame poll workers for the lack of support, resources, or training. My poll manager was a 15-year poll veteran who spent nearly the entire day managing this process alone, not even taking a break to eat or to go to the bathroom, as far as I could tell. But she shouldn't.
Real quick, Ms. Borders, we're almost out of time, and I wondered if you might take a couple of questions. We do have a couple of questions. I hate to stop you, but if we don't stay on schedule, we'll never finish today.
I would like to request that everybody else finish, so if I can finish, I would greatly appreciate that as my right.
Take another couple of minutes if you will, and then if you don't mind answering these questions, and then we'll have to move on.
All right, thank you so much. She should not have had to spend her entire day to call the elections office to handle such a large volume of voters who had requested absentee ballots that they never received. This is a failure of our system and we must fix it now. We face yet another obstacle at the end of the day where our poll manager didn't know how to handle closing at 7 p.m. At the end of closing, there were at least 100 people still in line. The line wrapped around the building and went to the street. And our poll manager immediately prevented voters who were in line when the polls closed from entering the building, per apparent orders that she received from her superior. She said that she could not let additional voters into the building after 7 p.m. I knew this was wrong and I interjected. The poll manager said that in her 15 years experience, she had never been in this situation. It appeared that none of us had been trained how to handle voting after 7 p.m. Other poll workers started closing actions and the poll workers saw how upset I was. And so she reached out to every contact she could at the elections office to find further instruction. Eventually she reached an official secretary and they forwarded her an email from Fulton County instructing precincts that all votes that should be cast provisionally after 7 p.m. In all my years of voting, I have always been taught if you are in line before 7 p.m., you should be able to vote just like everybody else. I had never heard that it would be by provisional ballot. None of us knew that rule. The poll manager instructed workers to set up tables so that voters could vote provisionally. At around 7:20 p.m., voting resumed, but instead of voting provisionally, the poll manager had apparently changed and decided that voters could vote normal ballot by the normal ballot marking devices. Then from my understanding, they were directed to place their ballots in provisional envelopes instead of the tabulator. There was too much confusion about what to do, and this should never happen at any precinct ever again. By the time the last voter had cast their ballot, the polling location was a mess because that's how we started. There were pages of shutdown instructions in the poll manager's binder, and none of us had been through this process before. Not all the I's were dotted or the T's were crossed in this process, and this wasn't our fault. We were learning on the fly without proper training or resources, and we were totally unprepared and did the best we could. My hope is that this committee will take action after hearing these testimonies today. We need accountability, training, and resources from our Secretary of State to each of Georgia's 159 counties to ensure free, fair, safe, and secure elections in November. We all want this, so let's get it done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Borders. We have a couple of questions. Do you mind answering those quickly?
Yes, sir, of course.
We're out of time, but I do want to get these questions asked if possible. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Ms. Borders. You mentioned about the training videos and how you're given a link at noon the day before to begin watching those. Was there any interactive training for you at all? Was there any opportunity for you to ask questions? Was there somebody you could tap when you ran into something that was maybe a little gray or confusing?
No, sir. To be short and answer your question directly, it was literally just watching the videos and then taking a quiz at the end of all of them.
Questions on the quiz?
To be honest with you, I don't remember, but I do know that I got 100% on the quiz. And I can forward you all the certification if you would like.
From your passion, I can guarantee I believe you when you say that you got 100%. The real question is just around that process. Obviously, there were some problems with COVID, but causing problems. But the nature of the training is what I really wanted to know, and that answers the question. Thank you, ma'am, for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the insufficient training has been a theme. Just two questions for you. Number one, can you tell us what kinds of things were actually in the training? And then number two, you mentioned that some folks showed up and had not actually completed the training. Was there any point or anything where you had to sign an affidavit saying you'd done the training, or just anything proving that you had actually completed the training other than the quiz before you actually started working as a poll worker?
No, ma'am. Thank you for your question, first of all. The only thing was a congratulation that's at the end that you completed the training. And I'm so sorry. Could you repeat your first question? I'm so sorry.
Yes, the first question was what sort of things were in the training videos? Like what kind of topics, what were they covering?
So it basically went through a basic tutorial, if you want to put it in plain language, like IKEA would, I guess you could say, for instructions on how to work a machine. So basically it was giving you the basic anatomy of the machines themselves. But keep in mind, I took the poll worker training, but it kept referencing the poll manager training, because ultimately opening and closing the machines were supposed to be up to our poll manager. And unfortunately, our poll manager didn't know how to do any of that with the technology at all.
Thank you again, Ms. Borders. Appreciate your passion and your time. We do have some other questions, but since we're kind of out of time, we ran a little long here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service, Ms. Borders. We have next on the agenda is from Carroll County, Ms. Carol Beckham. Are you ready, Ms. Beckham? If you are, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me and allowing me time to give you some input from our November election. I'll share my experience from June 9th. And in Carroll County, we were one of the trial participants for the new equipment. So I've been able to work on this new equipment for the last election, and then I was able to work 3 weeks of early voting, so that I'm pretty familiar with the equipment. And I think Carroll County did a really good job of trying to make sure people were trained. So what I'm going to share is just some of the experience I have with the equipment, and then I'll make a couple of recommendations. But in setting up the equipment, I missed having a step-by-step laminated sheet that tells you how to set up each piece of equipment for opening. So we used to have that in it, and I could hand that to two of my workers and say, you know, set up the B&Ds or set up the poll pads, and it was a step-by-step, very easy back and front thing. There was also one for closing the polls, so that each piece of equipment, you knew what to do at closing the polls time, and you would be able to, and it was not clear in our information from, I guess, the Secretary of State's office as to how to do that. I kind of knew how to do it, but it's been a long time since I had actually worked with the equipment, so it was I still struggle a little bit with that, and I think it would be easy if we had those laminated sheets. So that was the first problem I saw. And then the second thing was on the poll pad. We had an issue with the poll pad where when you created a voter card, and it didn't happen every time, and you couldn't tell when it was going to happen. I think it happened to me about 8 or 10, maybe 12 times during the day. But you would be able to create a voter card, and when you gave it to the voter, it looked like everything was fine. They would go over to the DMV and they would actually insert it, and it would come back and say card already used. So they would come back to us, didn't pull up a ballot or anything, it just said card already used. They would come back to us, and we would try to give them a new card. And when we did, it showed that the voter had already voted. So it showed incorrectly that the voter had already voted. So we had to then back that voter out, and I had to call, of course, and there were some pretty good instructions on how to do that, but I had to call the office and let them know what was going on. And the problem with that is that it probably wouldn't have taken very long, except that the reasons that you had to click to tell what had happened, why you were taking this voter out and issuing them a new card, didn't work. So sometimes you'd have to try it 3 or 4 times to get it to work. And so each of those it was counting each of those as a vote count. And so then the machine count that you do every 2 hours to make sure that you're on track, of course, that's thrown askew. So I don't think interfered with the votes that were counted, but it did, it was time consuming, and just you never knew when it was going to happen. So that was a problem. The other thing was on the BMBs, most of the time these worked really good, but we had a situation that came about at the end of the day where it was not, the display was not talking to the printer, and nothing I did, powering it up, powering it down, allowed that to be fixed. And so had it been earlier in the day, I probably would have called for a technician to come out. And fortunately with us, it only happened with one of the machines, and I just went ahead and closed that machine down, and we were able to work with the other 5. We're a small, fairly small precinct, and had it been bigger and this been a bigger problem, I could see how it would have caused chaos. The scanner that we had, for the most part, it worked good. We did have a paper jam in it, and as soon as I started to try to fix that paper jam, it cleared itself and it counted that vote. So, we were fortunate in that we didn't have to then get that fixed, because we only had one scanner, and most places only had one scanner. So that would have put us, kind of out of business. The next thing was, and the thing that was our worst problem all day long, was the absentee ballots, just like everybody else. It was just an abysmal failure. The efforts by the Secretary of State to get these out to everybody, I totally understand that, but it was a total failure. One of the things, maybe some PSAs would have helped, or something that told us, told people, rest assured, we're doing this because of COVID. Some said that they wanted their vote to count, and they'd heard from some people that their vote would not count if they used the absentee ballot. Some said that they burned theirs, and I think they thought we wouldn't know. And of course, you do know, because it shows up that they've received an absentee ballot. We can't take their absentee ballot, so most of those had to sign an affidavit saying that you had to call the office every time, call the election office, and they were very good about responding. But you had to call the election office, and then you had to get them to sign an affidavit, which is all, time consuming. I would say about half of the large number that we received absentee ballots had to be backed out of the system, and the office had to be called, and the affidavit had to be signed. So my recommendations based on all this is, I think our training was adequate for our county. I would say that my recommendation of how to fix the things that I saw were to develop the laminated cards for each machine for opening and closing. It's just so much easier, and you should not have to wade through and try to figure that out. Develop some simple procedures when a piece of equipment fails. So if there's something we can do, the powering up, the powering down, some of those things I fixed on my own, just because I was kind of familiar with the equipment, and they had given us that in training. If I had not known that, it would have been very difficult. And I think there's some things that you don't have to call a technician on, and you should be able to just simply power up, power down, see if that works, and then call a technician if those simple things don't work. I think a questionnaire should be sent out to all the poll managers to find out what their top 3 or top 4 things that we don't get asked that very often, or ever. What were the top 3, top 4 things that they observed during the day? And most of them will tell you what took up all their time. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I believe that also that a strong recommendation for me is that because of the situation we're all in, I believe that voters should be required to wear masks. We all did. We did it all day long, unless, my instructions to them were if when you go to eat in the a little room we had set aside, you can take your mask off then, as long as you're, away from other people. We had it social distance. We had it marked off, although I don't think that was a requirement for us to have it marked off so that the voters were standing 6 feet apart. We did.
Ms. Beckham, my apologies. I don't know if you can hear me, and I hate to cut you off, but we're just about out of time here. Do you mind taking a question or two, or?
I'm through. I just think I think voters should wear masks.
Thank you. And again, I hate that we have limited time, so my apologies for cutting anybody off here. But see if we can get a couple of questions answered. Representative Gullett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you aware in your county if you guys have a poll training manager there or a poll training coordinator?
Yes, we do.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yes, we do.
And the work, like the instructional manuals of putting machines together, those types of things that you had, I guess you had those previously. Was that given to you? Do you know, did the county put that together? Like your poll training manager put that together to put with your kit that would go to the precinct that you managed? Or is that something else?
I don't know who put that together, but we were trained with those manuals, and the manuals themselves are very good. But the laminated 2 sheets to open and close, we're missing, and we need to have those, especially for big elections.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Beckham, for your work. I just have 2 quick questions. On the training, was there a requirement for the number of hours you had to complete? And then was there additionally require a certain percentage by which you had to pass the test at the end or the quiz that was given?
We didn't have, our training took about, we were told it would take 2 hours. We finished a little bit before that, so that's what we set aside for it, but it wasn't a 2-hour training. We did not have a pass-fail. We worked in pretty small groups to do the training before this election. And we were trained, twice. The original training that I did when, before the election where we were trialing the equipment, was pretty extensive. I think it probably did last about 2 hours.
Thank you.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, ma'am. You had mentioned you're the multiple witness to describe a situation that occurred with your machine that would not communicate with the printer. And that
Right.
you decided as the poll manager to shut that particular machine down. Are you aware of any remediation that happened with that machine eventually, or did you just box it up and send it back to the office?
Well, I told them which machine it was, and they picked up the machines the next day. So, it was reported. I didn't call them that day because it was probably started about 5:30, and we had 5 other machines. So I just said a little prayer that the 5 other machines would continue to work, and they did.
Intervention. But you don't have any knowledge of what they did to either repair or fix that situation for that machine?
I don't.
Well, thank you, Ms. Beckham. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate the testimony.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me.
Next is Ms. Vanita Epps with Fulton County. Are you with us, Ms. Epps?
I am.
Please go ahead. Your floor is yours, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and the rest of the committee members. My name is Vanita Epps. I have been a poll manager or a team leader, like I like to think of myself, in Fulton County for 15 years. And I have served at the same polling location in South County, SC 11, for 20 years. Due to my opportunity to serve during the presidential preferential primary in March, we experienced minimal issues during Election Day on June 9th at SC11 in South Fulton County. I attribute that to the advanced training that I took advantage of and trial and error with the new equipment that was proved to be extremely beneficial on June 9th. I've been tasked to identify the best practices that attributed to our overall success, and I will share my experiences in terms of facilities, equipment, personnel, logistics, and communications. Facilities. At Election Precinct SC11, we're located in a community center within a park. So I made contact with the Parks and Recreation Manager a week prior to the election to set a time on Monday to go in and set up. Secure the contact information so that on Tuesday morning, there would be no delay in getting into the polling location on time. So therefore, my recommendation of a best practice is establish a contact with the facility manager, and that's critical to ensuring that you can gain entry to your polling location on election morning. Equipment. The election day technician actually helped me to determine that each B&D cabinet was connected on a separate electrical circuit. I knew that that was essential. The equipment was previously delivered, and so that we did not have to wait until Tuesday morning. They were not connected. We changed the logistics to comply with all electrical requirements of the new Dominion voting equipment. I feel that that's critical to scrutinizing electrical placement, and that by doing so, you will avoid any equipment malfunctions. Our supplies were as thus. We had 10 ballot marking devices, 1 emergency booth, 3 poll pads, 1 scanner, 5 reams of paper, which constituted 2,500 sheets of the special required paper. Supplies. Managers should pick up supplies on Sundays so that you can review contents of those bags and identify any missing items before election morning. I always follow up with a call to the election preparation warehouse. That's where Fulton County stores their equipment on the next day, that very next day on Monday, to secure and request delivery to my polling location for any equipment that is missing prior to election morning. This election warehouse is essential in Fulton County. And by having a good communication with that, you should never have to have a problem like having inadequate reams of paper for your printers, or having a problem with not having papers filled in the printers or running out of paper on election day. So it's a simple but critical task for the manager to make sure her supplies and equipment are in place before Tuesday morning. The ballot marking devices and the scanners worked well. We understood the connectivity of the cabinets. We knew how to set up the polls on the poll pads. We did encounter one problem with one printer that failed to completely print on 2 different voter ballots. When that occurred, I asked for the ballots. I voided them. We created a new voter access card. The voter printed a new ballot, and they continued to the scanner to cast their ballot on election day. Personnel. I feel that team building is essential. I have 5 permanent poll workers, including myself, 2 assistant managers, and 2 clerks who also served as runners. We took advantage of the time during isolation and COVID to continue our research, to continue study, to continue training with available documentation online. That's a requirement to work on my team. Due to the cancellation of the preferential primary on March 24th, and due to postponement of the general primary on May 19th, I felt that gave everyone who wanted to be an effective team member and poll worker time to take advantage of additional video training assessments. I had 3 extra staff workers who were sent to me on the day of the election. I wasn't notified beforehand, but I was happy to see them, and they provided an extra level of support. I assigned 1 to the line monitor greeter position, 1 as an extra monitor to collect cards and stylus pens, and 1 as a sanitizing agent who frequently cleansed the equipment and used the alcohol to sanitize the styluses. These 3 worked interchangeably in the customer service position because they had not received prior training, and I would not expect them to know how to adequately use the equipment. So I believe that each of these positions is critical, but it's more critical to know how to use your staff in the best possible way. Logistics. We set up the entrance and exit to allow for a reasonable flow from the poll pads to the ballot marking device to the exit where the scanner was located. And that's where the ADA station was also located to make it easy access for anyone who had those needs. Communication during the provisional extended hours of voting. That is the one area where I was very concerned. None of the permanent team members had any problems or issues with staying over for the extended hours. However, I received confusing communication about the modified process for processing voters after 7 p.m. Because of my years of extensive knowledge and understanding of the equipment and the entire provisional voting procedure, I waited through several phone calls till we finally agreed that the voters would still continue to be processed at the poll pad, issue a voter access card, have them print their ballot, and then they seal the ballot in a provisional envelope before putting it in the designated provisional bag. We followed that protocol without any incident. In terms of provisional ballots, I received 7% of provisional ballots according to the total number of active voters in my precinct. I did receive enough to cover 250 for for my aide. I have 2 precincts. I'm a dual manager. So I had 215 for A and 250 for B. And that's divided up among Democrat, Republican, and nonpartisan ballots. So I had ample provisional ballots to utilize if necessary. But I did not get it twisted. I understood that voters should continue to vote from 7 to 9 using the regular procedures and just not use the scanner to end the process.
Ms.
In
Epps,
order
if you can hear me, my apologies. We're just
Yeah.
about out of time. You have a couple of
Okay.
questions, but if you have anything else you want to share with us, I don't want to cut you short, but we're about out of time.
I just wanted to highlight then a couple of few things that I do feel like going forward will help Fulton County at least. Look for polling locations that have logistical requirements that will accept the electrical requirements for the new equipment. Recruit new poll workers ahead of time so that they can be adequately trained on the equipment. Set up lines of communications like emergency broadcasts or text messages or calling posts to disseminate time-critical information like the emergency hours that came across at the last minute. Update the email application process in the registration office. Put in high-speed scanners that will work with the Dominion system And most important of all, seek remedy from the Secretary of State's office. They sent out the inordinate amount of absentee ballot applications. I have many voters who came in on election day and wanted to turn in their absentee ballot because they received them too late to mail them, and they also did not want to use the drop boxes to deliver their ballots. So I think that creating an online portal for submitting the absentee ballot applications on the Secretary of State's website would be to our great advantage. Thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas. I hope that I have given some ideas that will help improve the election process in Fulton County.
Thank you so much, Ms. Epps. Do you mind taking a question or two?
I will.
Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to commend you for the job you have done. It shows what happens when you have adequate training, and I really appreciate that. I checked with my elections director at home, and we did not have half the problems everybody else is having. We had none, as a matter of fact. It was very smooth, and no one was not able to vote. And he told me the same thing that you did. It was the training and the support, and I really appreciate how much you have done to do your job. Thank you. You're very appreciated.
Appreciate it.
Representative, is it Turner? You got yours? Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I really admire the sense of ownership you've displayed in your testimony and how you handle your job. Your recommendations, you mentioned very specifically how you handle the facilities, the supplies, the machines, the personnel, the communication with your team. Are those things that you learned yourself, or were they taught? Are those your own policies, or are those the expectations for every poll manager in Fulton County?
Those are the expectations for every poll manager in Fulton County. However, I will say that due to the fact that I've also had extensive training by working as a poll team leader during early voting, that just enhanced what I already felt within myself during the years that I worked, and the team building efforts and that I've built up during my career before I began to be a poll worker.
You mentioned that you use this word, the training for your 5 permanent members was a requirement to work on my team. And we heard earlier from a poll worker who was hired the day before,
right,
who just showed up, and the poll manager there apparently didn't have the same level of passion or experience that you did, or they had 15 years, but they didn't have the team that you had. Can you enlighten us a little bit of why you think that might be?
Yes.
Why would one polling place have a team of complete members who didn't know what they were doing, and yours were so well trained and ready to go?
Well, if I remember correctly from my notes, I'm not sure that did happen in Fulton County. I think you are speaking of Mr. testimony. And in that case, I was surprised to hear that in 30331, that would occur where you had a complete set of team members and none of them were experienced enough to carry on according to protocols that have been set. So the only thing that I can say, once again, I say recruit new poll workers and request help from outside resources ahead of time so that you don't end up trying to bring someone in on the day before and give them a quick training. Because although it may be look simple to do, you got to have a passion to serve, and you have to strive for excellence through taking the time to train. So let that happen ahead of time. You cannot send somebody in the day before and expect them to work in an expert manner. But what you can do is utilize extra support help like that in a customer service manner. Everybody should understand basic customer service. And that's how I use the persons who came to my location on the day of, which is 1-day training, not in a technical capacity at all, not on the poll pads, not helping the voters with the BMDs. I reserve those positions for persons who had taken the time to take the additional training, such as myself.
Just one last thing. You're probably the 3rd or 4th person to come testify for this committee today that mentioned power requirements. would your particular polling locations, multiple, I guess, be able to accommodate additional machines during the general election, or were you tapped out?
As a matter of fact, I've taken into consideration the fact that with 10 units, 2 for BMD and printer units, and 1 with the scanner and 2 other BMDs, that would probably be tapped out for the location where I am now. And so because of that, I have proactively requested my county to go out, research, and gave them some ideas about possible locations that's going to still be near that voting precinct where we can have additional equipment brought in, and that we should have the electrical requirements met for that additional equipment coming up in November, maybe not by August.
Well, Ms. Epps, thank you so much. I appreciate your dedication, your time here today, and not only for pointing out some issues, but also offering up some solutions to the committee. Next, we have Ms. Betsy Kramer.
Yes,
from
thank
Fulton
you.
County. Ms. Kramer, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Floor is yours. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, esteemed Chairman Blackman and committee members, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Betsy Kramer, and I am the poll manager of RW17 Esther Jackson Elementary School in Roswell, located in Fulton County. I'm just going to give you a little bit about my background. I have a BS in accountancy from Bentley College. I helped start the first bank on the internet in 1995 by creating policies and procedures that the bank operated with. I retired in 1998 to be a stay-at-home mom for my hardest job as being a mother of 2 children. I am also an owner of a small business, and I help run our family charitable foundation. Now, to start, I think what I saw that day was the county tried to incorporate old procedures with the new system. The documentation was subpar. There was no troubleshooting documentation, so I had to make phone calls, or I had to wait for my tech to come by. Paperwork was missing or not enough, and I reviewed all my paperwork that I picked up on Sunday. I reviewed it on Sunday, and I made calls to report this. At my end of night envelopes were not included as well, so I had to bring my own, make my own, or there was a few blank envelopes that were in my bag that I used. In that part, I think that the place where they do all the fulfillment, there needs to be a check and balance for people to, one person fulfills it, another person checks it. My training, I took my training back in February. I took it like maybe the second time they offered the class, and I felt that it was unorganized, but luckily I know enough about iPads and other tablets that I felt comfortable. But at the same time, I did take it the day before I was having a major operation. But that said, I felt that I was going to be able to work on the PPP, which ended up being postponed. And then it was just postponement after postponement. And I did take advantage anytime that they told me that they were offering any classes or come check out and play with the machines. I took advantage of that. My staff, I only had one poll worker who wouldn't work due to the COVID. And I think that in general was a big problem throughout the state. I did have a full staff, and then this, without me knowing, the county did send 2 extra people who were county workers, and they were actually fabulous. But I did, like the previous person, I did put them in a positions where they didn't really have to know how to work the machines. So I was very grateful for that. Poll pads, my only problem with them was when someone popped up as being out of precinct, it only gave me the precinct number, and most people don't know their precinct number, nor do I know other precinct numbers in Roswell or anywhere in the county. And I would have to call downtown to say, hey, where's, AP what this or RW this. There was no way of looking it up. It would have been nice if it was actually on the poll pad itself. Absentee ballots, yeah, there was a lot, and we were supposed to get an absentee ballot box, which never showed up. A lot of people brought in their absentee ballots and we spoiled them and allowed them to vote. People that didn't have their ballots with them and said they didn't mail it in or didn't do anything with it, they signed an affidavit. Another problem was we didn't have enough extension cords for the poll pads to be plugged in. BMDs, I had problems starting them up, but that was more due to the fact that the instructions said one thing, and then the machine was saying, or the pad was actually saying another thing. And being the type of person I am, I'm like expecting to see apples to apples and not something different. So I did open up an hour late, or a little bit over an hour. But we cleared once we actually opened up, we cleared the line, went really fast, and we got people through. Sometimes, yes, the BMDs had an error or the card had a problem, and if it errored out, we would have the person remove their voter card, and I would use my poll manager card and reset the machine, or we would send them back to not to the line, but to the poll pad to get a new card. And there was another thing, there was not enough signs in the cabinet as to how to use these new machines. We, in exchange, we actually, we told them verbally what to do. So like I said, we opened up an hour late, but throughout the day, we never had long lines. Maybe the first, when we first opened, yes, but after that, we never had more than a few people in line, and maybe a 10-15 minute wait. The scanner, we didn't have a problem until the end of the day, and I attribute that to the humidity in the school. We finally figured out that maybe the school didn't really put the AC up a high, because usually we bring sweaters because we're cold, and to that day we weren't cold. But everything really worked well. Provisional balloting, we only had 4 or 5 of them. We didn't get all the provisional ballot paperwork for reporting it. We got all the ballots. We had, I think, 4 Democrat provisional ballots and 3 Democrat and 1 Republican provisional. We always offered people that were in the wrong place, you can vote provisional, or you can drive over to your new, to where you were supposed to vote. And once 7 o'clock came, we put a cutoff as to who could vote via put their votes via the scanner. And once those people got through, we started putting, we were provisional balloting, which I was given explicit instructions on how to do it. And we had no issues. We only had 14 people come in through the 2 extra hours. Other difficulties I had was calling downtown to different departments. I would have to call a whole bunch of times. Technical support, I had a great tech support, but she was also running around to many other places. And at one time she told me, I'm sorry, I was here late, but I had to go get gas and I had to drive downtown to get it. That was not a good use of her time.
Ms. Kramer, do you, I'm
Yeah, that's
sorry to
fine.
interrupt. We're running a little short on time.
Okay,
Do
that's
you
fine.
mind taking a couple of questions, or,
Sure.
or did you have a little bit left?
No, I'll just say this, just to skip. My husband is a senior fellow on an organization called IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And they actually put out a request for volunteers for Fulton County to come help determine the electrical loads in the buildings. Now, I know my building's brand new, so hopefully it's going to be able to deal with all these, the electrical pull. But I do know that there was a call for these engineers to go out and look at different polling places. That said, thank you. I hope I made sense. I hope I was detailed enough.
You were great. Do you mind taking a question or two?
Yeah.
Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kramer, you mentioned that at certain points before Election Day, you did take advantage of advanced training. Thank you for doing
Yes.
that. My question is around what training is required. Is there anything in the process for poll managers that requires you to take a basic level of training? Like, is there any point where anybody from the county or the Secretary of State checks to make sure that you at least did the basic training? Do you have to sign anything? I guess I'm just wondering what checks and balances are there so that we don't have a brand new poll manager just showing up thinking, I can probably handle it. I'll be able to wing it. Is there anything that verifies that you did do at least the basic level of training?
Yes, my face-to-face, I have to sign in because I actually get paid for that. And then I had to take a test at the end of it. And then all the other, like, they did have an online training, which I think a few people took, like that person the day before. But it was very elementary. It was nice to just have a good review, and that I did have to take a test at the end. And yes, I got 100, and I felt it was very easy test. That said, I don't know why it was so easy, but I don't think they wanted to make it so difficult either. But when I went down, like they gave me opportunities to go play with the machines, I did ask questions. Even on the day that I picked up my supplies on Sunday, the day before, 2 days before the election, they had the machines up and I was able to go look and ask questions because they had a trainer there. And, but it's still, I think the biggest problem was that we were thrown into a huge election that we had never really worked or felt these machines. And I've been working for over 10 years, working in some manner in the polls. And I just think that, with COVID and the new machines, I think they lost a lot of people to work because people didn't want to learn a new system. And, because the other ones were around for like 16, 17 years. So, they did the best they could. Could they improve? Oh, for sure. And now I feel like, I was thrown into the fire and I made it out and I, know a lot more than I did before.
Representative Burnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also for serving as a poll manager. I just had one question. You mentioned that at a certain time at night, that night that you had to decide who would get a provisional and who would vote on the machine. How did you make that decision?
Well, I was told as of 7 that we were switching over to provisional balloting. So anybody in line prior to 7, as long as they were there by 7 o'clock, they got to go through and vote on the BMDs and then get their ballots scanned. We just decided there was a good cut on, because we only had like 3 people before 7, and then there was maybe a minute where there was 2 people that came in. And we just said, okay, these 2 people will start voting provisionally. Now, that said, the instructions was to give them a voting card on the poll pad, have them vote on the BNDs, but instead of scanning, they were to put their ballot into a provisional envelopes and then put it into the provisional bags, the provisional voting bag that we had.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Gullett, last question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Kramer.
You're welcome.
Quick question: the training that you had that you took, whether the advanced training or the very elementary training that you talked about as well. Do you know who put those on? Was it the Secretary of State or was it Fulton County who
Fulton
provided
County.
that training to you?
I think Fulton County, from my understanding, there are 159 counties and 159 different operating procedures. They get from the Secretary of State, they get the overall, how they have to operate, but each county has to implement them according to their needs. In their.
Thank you very much. That's my understanding as well. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I'm glad you can agree.
Ms. Kramer, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your testimony. And with that, we will move on to, I believe we have somebody in person next, is Miss Susie Voiles at, you Miss Voiles? Okay, so you zoomed all the way in here. Yes, ma'am. I'll turn the podium, the floor over to you.
All right. I also work for Fulton County. I'm a manager. I was in a new poll this time. And I'm grateful to hear the other two managers before me. I've been a poll manager for over 20 years. So I was there long enough to inaugurate the old system. So I've been in 3 voting systems so far. The only thing that I would do differently inaugurating a new system is when we inaugurated the Diebold or the Diebold, however you want to pronounce it, we had a tech in every precinct. And that was part of the vendor agreement. If somebody wants to sell their system to the entire state, I think that's a valuable thing. Wherever the techs come from, whether they trained them, I think having a tech, because we opened up with 2 poll pads, and the very first thing out of the blocks was one of my poll pads didn't work. Fortunately, our tech just happened to have been in our poll. So that I think would be my biggest recommendation, is to have a tech for the inaugurating of everything. Because we had to share techs this time. I was just fortunate to do that. The only major hiccup that I had, didn't have too many problems. We had a kind of a funny problem with the poll pads. It kept wanting to default to a speaking ballot, but that was something we could quickly figure out. If we did not plug the ear pads in, it could operate the same way. So after one person said, it's coming up saying, I have to plug the audio in, I figured out I could touch something and that worked out okay. So there were little glitches that we learned through, but I think, as did my previous 2 workers, the best thing that can happen, I have a team of 10. However, I was told I could only bring 7 for this election. And that was all I was going to need. So I told 3 of my workers, and I also have 2 substitutes who are very reliable just in case somebody can't work that particular day. So I have a total of 5 who were not utilized properly in my view, because I didn't know until Monday before that we still needed 250 workers. They did send me 2 additional who had been Fulton County workers. I was pleased to have them. They helped me monitor my doors, and that was a great thing, because I did have one time where my printer jammed. So that was causing a little bit of a backlog. But one person in line put it in perspective. They only had to wait about 20 minutes, but he said, this is no big deal. I just came from the car tag office in Fulton County, and I had to wait over 4 hours in line. So I think that put things in perspective for people, that the car tag line was worse than the election line. So we didn't have that problem, but the training that we received was not only adequate, I think it was superior, because since we received it so early and then the election was canceled, They made sure that we received it again. And I think the combination of the in-person and the online training, and I think you asked a question earlier. Yes, if we don't complete that online training, we are not certified to work. And if my poll workers, likewise, do not complete their training, whether it's in person or online, and it's usually a combination of the two at the beginning of an election cycle, which this is the beginning of this election cycle, then they don't work. And they know that. And sometimes they're rushing to do things. I did find at the early voting locations, there were some issues. And I don't know if they were because of absentee ballots, but one of my poll workers who has been voting in Fulton County for 39 years since she was 18 was not on the rolls. That also brings up this absentee ballot. This was received by a friend's, request, not the ballot, I'm sorry. It was received at my friend's address for her father, who passed away 4 years ago. And the dilemma is he's not on the Secretary of State's website. So then the question is, how was a ballot sent out for him, ballot request? And had my friend not been honest, I explained to Mr. Sterling, I said, if my friend hadn't been honest, she could have filled this out. When it came to her house as his daughter, she could have legitimately also filled out the ballot, because somebody doesn't know, even though we've turned it in, that he's dead. Somehow we have to check out our rolls. So I think that's an important thing. I really didn't have much of a problem. Anything that we had, I think when you've worked in a poll for an extended period of time, and maybe what I would recommend listening to the other two managers, is if you have somebody who is managerial material, so to speak, who understands how to put a team together, how to keep a team, how to help the team continue to function together. Perhaps somebody who is an assistant manager who really has a passion to do this should be placed a couple of elections in with a manager who knows how to function and who doesn't wind up with a lot of hiccups. I only had 6 extended hour voters, and they came in from 8 until 9. I think the worst part about being a poll manager, to be honest with you, is the closeout procedures. Particularly at a time like this, I had to be there before 5 o'clock in the morning because Fulton County schools were not responding to my request 2 weeks before. I called every day, then I called twice a day. I called my support people at the Board of Elections. I finally went to the school and found out where UPS was supposed to deliver a package, so I called that number. I got Ollie on the phone, but he refused to come back on Monday, which meant we had to set up on Tuesday morning. So I said, well, Ollie, I can respect that, but I need you here at 5. And he was there at 5, and so was my team, which would have made the day extra long anyway. But then when we had extended hours, and by the time you finish closing, that makes it, I marked that we left for the poll at 10:19. But I really could have done, and then you go to the service center and you wait because you have to check in your materials. And so you don't just plop them on the floor. There's a procedure for that to make sure you've returned everything, you've got everything done. I like the new system. I really do. I think it's good. I would recommend that we have 2 scanners and at least 3 poll pads. And other than that, I think sending out mass absentee ballot requests may have been well-intentioned, but that's where I had most of my hang-up. That's what held up most of my lines, because I did have to call down and verify, did John Smith send in his ballot? I only had one person that tried to do that. where his ballot had been received. But the problem of so many people, my husband and I did not receive our absentee ballots, but I could early vote. He was out of town, he could not. Our daughter, who works for a congressman up in DC, never received hers. And I kind of jokingly said to the assistant supervisor in Fulton County, I said, well, you have two choices. You can either buy me a ticket and I'll hand carry her ballot up there, or you can fly her down so she can vote, which I'd known this person for 20 years. So she knew I was being, I was not being serious, but those were the only options. So our daughter, who works hard for the state and for the federal government, was denied her own vote. Anyway, yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much for your service. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. That was very enlightening. And we had I didn't see you had Representative Shannon.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you have a lot of experience, and I'd actually wanted to ask this question to Vanita, but it seems like you have just as much experience. In the 20 years that you've been doing this as a poll manager, we have heard folks say in this last election that they showed up to vote, voters showed up to vote, and there was a sign saying the location has been moved or was moved last minute. Is that something that can be prevented by doing the walkthroughs that you say that you do in the setting up the night before? Is that something that could be, kind of reduce the last minute changes by doing the walkthroughs?
I think that's one of the things that can happen, but theoretically they're to receive a postcard from Fulton County that says, and actually my poll, we were not able to go there, and they have tasked me with trying to find a new location that is of my pleasure. I was concerned for handicapped voters at my poll because the stairs are not to code, and if it's raining and we're in the basement, and I've been there when the power has gone out before and there's no lights, no windows, that was kind of exciting, but that was the advantage of a great team. I had somebody who was able to take a 250-foot extension cord to a house that was very close. And we moved our main check-in table out. And so that worked.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions, Ms. Boyles. I really appreciate you coming down.
Well, I appreciate the privilege, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your work. Next, we have Mr. Gordon Austin, I believe Carroll County. Are you with us, Mr. Austin?
Yes. First, I want to thank you for identifying me on the schedule as citizen. I am quite proud of that title. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on my recent voting experience. I'll be reading my statement to be sure I report accurately. After my statement, I'll be happy to answer any questions. My wife and I both received applications for absentee ballots, and as we are both over 65, we did request absentee ballots. My wife received her absentee ballot, I did not. So I called Greg Rigby, the Carroll County election supervisor. He told me to give it more time. Several weeks later, I called again to say I still had not received my ballot. He said, let me check your records. After a few minutes, he said, according to the file, we have received and that we both received and returned our ballots. I interpreted that to mean that we were both being counted as having cast ballots. I assured him I had not received or cast my ballot. He said he would cancel the first ballot and send me another. Another few weeks passed. I called again to say I still have not received my ballot. He said, let me check something and call you back. He called back and asked for my mailing address. I told him 423 North Lakeshore Drive. He told me I was registered at 102 South Street, which is the address of Stewart House, which is a nursing home. I told him I had been registered at 423 North Lakeshore Drive since 1990. He told me he could not change my address back until after the election. He also said he had my new ballot in hand and I could pick it up or he could mail it to my wife's address. I then verified on the Secretary of State's website that indeed my address had been erroneously changed. So now that I had my ballot in hand, I discovered that due to the different address, I was no longer in the 18th House District, which was a contested primary due to Kevin Cook's retirement. but now is in the 69th district, Randy Nix's district. As my new registration address did not match my driver's license ID, I could not vote in person in either district. So I had to vote absentee. And there was no legal way for me to vote in my 18th district. So I voted absentee without the opportunity to vote for my own state representative. On June 2nd, I again went on the Secretary of State website and discovered that my address had been corrected, but because I'd already voted by absentee, I could not vote in person on June 9th. To me, this raises multiple issues. First, the Carroll County Election Board did correct my address before the election, but because of what the election supervisor told me, I voted absentee. Secondly, how did my address get changed and who changed it? And finally, and certainly my biggest concern, did someone fill out and return my first absentee ballot committing voter fraud? I'll be glad to take any questions.
You don't appear to have any questions. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Austin? Oh, Representative Collins.
Yes. Dr. Austin, thank you for being here with us today and giving your testimony.
My pleasure.
Have you not been able to find out the answer to any of those questions that you have posed to this committee?
I have not. And as I said, it's to the best of my understanding that I was told that my vote had been received as cast. And I don't know of any way to verify that one way or the other, but it still is my primary concern is that someone did cast my first absentee ballot. Even though it was voided, it didn't get counted. But my understanding is that it was cast.
Do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, one follow-up question. So it is of your opinion and quite frankly mine as well that someone cast a ballot that was intended for you that clearly did not come to you. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my understanding.
Representative Rick Williams, you wave. Any further questions of Dr. Austin? Excuse me if I got that wrong.
As I said, citizen was my proudest
Well,
title.
thank you very much for sharing with us today. Quite disturbing. I'm going to turn it over to you if you have any final comments.
No, I just wanted to be accurate. So I sat down and wrote line step by step exactly what happened. And it was disturbing. And I'm concerned that my address was changed. And but most concerned that someone did receive that ballot and did try to cast it.
Well, we'll try to do better. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Dr. Austin. Moving on, we have Mr. Halsey Knapp, attorney from
Yes,
Fulton County. Mr. Knapp, are you with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can. We'll turn it over to you, sir.
Appreciate it. I've been a poll watcher for the last 3 presidential elections. And about 5 years ago, my daughter turned to me and said, "Dad, I know you're a good lawyer, but what are you doing to make the world a better place?" I didn't have a good answer to that question at the time, but what I did was commit myself to the issue of elections in the state of Georgia. And I've been active in litigation involving elections in Georgia for the preceding 5 years. I'd like to share a perspective with the committee from the 40,000-foot level in terms of policy and procedure as to how it might address some of the issues that showed up on election day. In order to be prepared for today, I attended the Fulton County Board of Election meeting of June 11th, the 4-hour meeting where there was a postscript review by Mr. Barron and the rest of the board as to what had gone wrong in their view. I reread the minutes of all the meetings in the year 2020, as well as reviewing the operations report, and also gathered public sources of information. From this, it's clear there's 3 methods of reducing or eliminating lines on election days at polling places in Fulton County: absentee ballots, early voting, and then the emergency paper ballot provisions in the 30-minute line rule and Comp Reg 183-1-12.11 parens 2 parens C parens D, a provision that is too often neglected in the practice here in the state of Georgia. Let me first focus on the state of Secretary of State and how they contributed to some of the issues that we had. The Secretary of State was solely responsible for contracting with the absentee by mail voting vendors that were to provide ballots back to Georgia voters. They negotiated that contract with an affiliate of Dominion Voting Systems called Runbeck. Runbeck is one of the largest voting ballot procurement companies in the country. But by April 9th of this year, it was clear that because of the movement sweeping the nation to use paper ballots, that demands on such companies were beyond their capacity to fulfill. And if you kept track with what happened in Wisconsin, where over a million absentee ballots were requested and over 800,000 were not received under a Runbeck contract, you would understand why one would have concern of their ability to, in fact, deliver absentee ballots. What was Runbeck's performance in the state of Georgia? It was poor. They turned around absentee ballots between 7 and 30 days after receiving notice from Fulton County that a particular ballot request had been returned. Why did it take so long? Well, Runbeck's in Arizona, and also the envelopes that it used were odd sized, and so the mailing requirements took more time than it would otherwise. How did that affect Fulton County? Let me share some numbers with you so we can be concrete. Fulton County, by June 5th, had processed 143,900 absentee ballots, meaning a ballot request. At the end of the election period, they had counted 85,000 absentee ballots. That means there was 59,000 would-be absentee ballot voters who did not turn in their absentee ballots. And either one or two things happened to those 59,000 people. One, they were disenfranchised, meaning they never voted. And the Secretary of State could determine the numbers who that is by matching the people who purportedly had applied and gotten ballots versus actually voting on election day. Or the second thing that they did was vote on election day and jammed up the lines at polling places because of the procedure that one has to go through when you have been issued an absentee ballot. You've heard several people here talk about that process. A phone call has to be made down to the district office. The absentee ballot has to be canceled, and then an affidavit has to be filled out. As you can imagine, with heavy turnout, and let me tell you, Mr. Barron reports that 27% of the voting population in Fulton County voted on June 9th, which is the highest turnout it's had in many, many years. It jams up the lines. Something has to be done to be sure that the fulfillment of absentee ballots are handled by the purveyor on the front end. It goes even deeper than that. Once you make a commitment of this size to absentee ballots, you need to rework your entire voting system, and that was not done here. For example, in January and February, the Secretary of State had the ability to set up and keep in-house the entire ballot tracking system. And so that the work did not have to be pushed downstream to the counties. When you have counties the size of DeKalb, Gwinnett, Cobb, and Fulton, it is a huge imposition of workload onto those staffs to start handling the responsibility of taking applications from people requesting ballots and then providing that information back to a provider to fulfill those requirements. It got worse. In April and May, the COVID virus increased the workload significantly on Fulton County, and I'm sure it did elsewhere. In June, at that point, the Secretary of State knew that there were scores of absentee ballots that would not be delivered on time. And as chair of the state election board, the secretary failed to exercise its emergency rulemaking power to move the burdens of absentee ballot cancellation from the polls on election day, which could have been done. In the future, that process needs to be modified so that in fact, if absentee ballot cancellations are a big part of the population again, it doesn't slow up everybody else. How else? What about early voting? The Secretary of State manages the My Voter Page webpage. As you could hear from the gentleman just before me, as happened to me personally, and happened to 6 of the 7 people I ran into on election day who did not get absentee ballots, the My Voter Page information was false. It purported to tell voters that their ballot had been sent and they had received it. And because of that, they did not vote during early voting. And instead, they would have to get in line on election day. That same problem had consequences for election officials. It was reasonable for Fulton County election officials early in the process, in early April and into May, to believe that the absentee ballot process would remove voters from the polls on election days. However, as the COVID virus tore into the number of potential sites that Fulton County could use, early voting no longer was able to take on additional loads that would normally be associated with early voting. Early voting in Fulton County usually covers 24 to 21 sites. When the early voting sites were set up in May, the 3rd week of May, there were only 5. The 4th week, there were 7. And the 1st week of June, there were only 8. Obviously, several orders of magnitude less than what had been done historically. And obviously, in the light of the absentee ballot load here and the size of the electorate, that it was should have been increased, not decreased. It was obvious to anyone who was watching the system that new poll workers and new polling locations would be needed, and nothing was done that appears on the record. Finally, electrical load requirements. We've heard a little bit about this from different people, and it evidenced itself on election day by many machines not being able to boot up at the beginning of the day. The state contracted with a vendor to check all the polling sites to see if they could handle the electrical circuitry of this new digital voting system that the state purchased. The state fell behind in its deadlines and benchmarks to check the sites, and for some reason Fulton County was the very last county. The largest county and the largest voting population in the state was the last county to have the electrical circuitry fixed. And when poll locations had to be changed, then those new poll locations probably were never checked. And that led to some of the problems that we saw as well. Training. You can see there's a great variety of experiences.
Knapp, if you don't mind, I just, if you have another minute or two, we're about out of time here.
Okay. Training was in person in January and February. Like Ms. Voiles, she had that experience. She learned a lot. Ms. Kramer, who never got to touch the machines because she wasn't trained in January, February, the experience shows. Training manuals were not available to people like they were historically. The polling workers, many were not allowed to wear masks because they were told that would disenfranchise voters. Ms. Cox, who brought in the system in 2002, has a interview that she gave last week, which points out the absence of support on several orders of magnitude less than what was given to the system in 2002 by the vendors and by the Secretary of State. And obviously the state voting population is much larger now. The board failed its function. The Board of Elections at Fulton, it has to encourage its director to over-prepare, particularly given the history here. They have the obligation to see that there's multiple contingency plans for these tools. They did not do that. They need to be sure that Mr. Barron prints enough emergency ballots that when the line gets more than 30 minutes long, that those emergency ballots are used. They have not done so. That takes preparation. That is on the Fulton County Board of Election. Its elected director, Mr. Barron's main problem was that emails, applications were coming in for absentee ballots on 2 different email boxes. That system failed catastrophically. He'll be glad to tell you that. The other issues though that aren't really.
Mr. Knapp, my apologies. I have a couple of questions. Perhaps you can work your last thoughts into those questions, or we've
Whatever you wanna do.
kind of crossed over our time here, if you don't mind, sir.
That's fine.
Representative Gullett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Knapp, for being here, for testifying for us. Just a quick question related. You said, I think it was either 60,000 or 80,000 absentee ballots weren't turned in Fulton County. Is that the right number?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, and then you said there's two reasons for that. One, someone was either disenfranchised or someone came back to the polls to vote and turned their absentee ballots in. Sir, disenfranchised is a word that is very different than I think that you meant to intend. It means to deprive someone of the right to vote. Do you believe that 60,000 people that didn't turn their absentee ballots in were deprived the right to vote, or just?
No, I said one of two things happened, and I didn't say how many did one or did the other. The state can determine that. It would be correct for, as you say, to say that a certain number of people did not choose to go and try to vote after having the experience of not receiving their absentee ballot. That would be the technically correct way to refer to that. I, in that circumstance, went and actually early voted. So I got counted. So 60 is probably an
Thank you, Mr.
overstatement.
Chair, and thank you, Mr. Knapp, for your testimony. I just have one question, and this was something that was brought up in testimony before. The process by which when a voter shows up and would like to vote in person because they either did not receive their absentee ballot or they are choosing to cancel, the process by which we have to make that phone call back, is that something that is set forth by the Secretary of State, or is that state code that we would be able to change legislatively to make sure that it doesn't require as much time to allow a person to cancel their ballot?
I cannot speak authoritatively on that. I know it's one or the other. It's either the state election board rule or it's the legislature, but it's something that should be addressed by both going forward so that it does not clog the polling places.
Mr. Knapp, thank you for that testimony. I wish we had more time. I'm sorry we had to cut it short, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Next,
Thank you.
we have Jennifer Atkins. Am I saying that right? She is the Assistant Supervisor of Elections in Cherokee County. Ms. Atkins, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Okay, please, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Jennifer Akins, and I am the Assistant Supervisor of Elections for Cherokee County. I want to begin by stating that I feel our general primary election went as well as could be expected, given the extraordinary circumstances we were faced with. However, from the start, I do not feel that we were adequately trained on all the processes needed to use the entire suite of products involved with this equipment. The initiative by the Secretary of State to push absentee by mail voting, while necessary, placed a huge burden on our staff. For many weeks, we worked remotely from our homes and processed absentee ballot applications from sunup until the statewide voter registration system was turned off around 11 p.m. We brought in as many additional workers as we could, and everyone worked nonstop to process the absentee ballot applications as quickly as we could. All of our time and resources were devoted to making sure the ballots were mailed out in a timely manner, as the turnaround time for a voter to receive their ballot was longer than most voters are accustomed to. While this was happening, polling places and poll workers were dropping out constantly. Excuse me. We scrambled to find locations that were willing to accommodate us and to train additional workers that would be necessary to staff all of our locations. We were also receiving new directives and additional information that was critical to conducting the election. It was difficult to keep up with everything that was on our plate. I'm so sorry. My throat is dry. we became aware of a few issues on or after Election Day. One of them was a few instances of touchscreen units automatically being turned on when plugged into the UPS. One of the byproducts of this happening was our poll workers thinking that these units were ready to accept voters instead of completing the opening procedures. And in that case, we experienced a delay in opening the poll. Another issue that we noticed during the adjudication process was the software not picking up all the races that would need review on a ballot in which the voter marked their choices with an X or check mark. It was an issue that we picked up at the beginning of the process and did our best to make sure each ballot that required adjudication was completely reviewed. A few other things that we are concerned with heading into November is that there is no fail-safe to prevent workers from improperly recreating a voter card, which causes problems tracking how many voters have been checked in. I believe somebody else mentioned this. The proper steps for unmarking and recreating a voter card are labor intensive, and it's far too easy for the poll worker to simply create an unlimited amount of voter cards without following those steps. Also, after a ballot printer jam, multiple ballots can be printed by a voter. And our biggest concern is the electrical requirements and large footprint of this equipment make it nearly impossible to put out the number of voter machines required. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Akins. I apologize for the pronunciation there. Do you mind taking a question or two?
Go ahead.
Representative Turner?
Hi, Jennifer. It's Scott. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I hadn't done.
I'm sorry. Start by describing the ballot printer jam in a little more detail because on Friday, the Cherokee Elections Office called me unsolicited to come and visit with them. And I spent 2 hours in their office. And this was by far the most alarming thing that I saw. It is incredibly easy to simulate a ballot paper jam using our printers. And I want, Jennifer, if you could, for the committee's sake, could you describe just how easy it is for somebody to walk away from their ballot marking device with up to 3 ballots?
When the ballot printer jams, the ballot that the voter initially wanted to print remains spooled in the printer. And on the ballot marking device, it asks if they want to print a second ballot. And that remains on the screen. They can push it as many times as they want. And once that printer is ready to start printing, they all come out.
So you could have a voter potentially walk away from their ballot marking device with 3 ballots. They're all identical. There's no identifying information on any of them to indicate that the voter, that each of these ballots came from the same voter. And they could potentially then be scanned as valid votes and counted as valid votes.
That's correct. They could all be scanned.
Representative Gullett?
Ms. Akins, thank you for your service to your county and for testifying here today. To go a step, I guess, after what Representative Turner was talking about with the ballots being printed, there's someone also that is a problem. There's no doubt about that. There's also someone at the machine that counts and that receives the ballots that is supposed to be watching the ballot be received. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are you still with us, Ms. Aiken?
Yes, I am.
Did you get that question?
I did. I said, yes, that is correct. There is someone at the ballot box who should be making sure that the voter only scans one ballot. However, there are opportunities for people to look away, get distracted, and have those ballots scanned.
So, yes, yes, but with any human element, there's always that opportunity for any way that we do this. It is a problem that we have to figure out why these things are printing multiple times. There is a safeguard that hopefully is working, where there is someone receiving it, but that has a human element, and that is, as a humans, we're flawed, and that could be flawed as well. Did I
Yes,
state that fairly
That's our
correctly?
concern, yes.
Thank you again.
Representative Turner, you want to?
I want to add just a perspective on that. Yeah, there is somebody that should be looking at that. But in the event that they're not, the real failure here is that the machine is doing it on its own. And that is and as far as the committee's work here, one of our recommendations must be, there is no option here. It must be that is rectified at the hardware level, so that is not a possibility, so that our people who are responsible for that don't have the opportunity for it to slip up.
Did you have any final thoughts, Ms. Akins?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your service and appreciate your testimony today. Next, we have, I got Mr. Joseph Kirk from Bartow County Election Supervisor. Mr. Kirk, are you with us?
I am. You hear me okay?
The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Kirk, and I've served as the Bartow County Election Supervisor since 2007. Before accepting this position, my career focused on implementing and supporting new voting technology in both Georgia and Mississippi. To give you a little perspective, Bartow County has around 75,000 voters, 5 full-time elections and registration employees, and our budget this year is right at about $1 million. A little over half of that is dedicated to permanent and temporary staff. First, I'd like to thank y'all for inviting me to speak to you today about my experience preparing for and conducting the June 9th primary election. Before I go any further, I should say that Bartow County has more experience with the new voting system than most. This is because we piloted the voting system in November of 2019. I am proud to say that I had a successful election on June 9th. We did not have people in line for hours upon hours. We had an incredible absentee by mail turnout that helped people away from packing the polling place on election day. And the public was very understanding and worked with us to keep themselves and the poll workers as safe as we could under the circumstances. Now, it wasn't perfect, but no election ever is. One poll opened late because of miscommunication with the folks who were supposed to open the building. We had longer lines than we were used to, and I thank each and every person who stood in those lines for their patience, dedication, and understanding. I think the only time we ever had a line of over an hour and a half was on the last day of advanced voting, and that's only because we only opened one advanced voting location. But overall, this election was defined by COVID-19. I think that the impact of COVID-19 on this election can be summarized in one word, and that's delays. Everything from the time it took to issue an absentee ballot to the time it took to report results took longer than it normally would. Our in-person response to the virus focused on trying to follow all public health recommendations as best we could. Employees were required to wear masks and work in smaller areas rather than collaboratively. Locations had less staff based on the size of the facility and how many people were willing to work. Poll workers were asked to enforce social distancing without compromising anyone's right to vote. Everyone found themselves tasked with new cleaning duties, often between every single voter. This all took extra time and drug out the process. In many cases, we were using about half the poll workers we would normally use. We even chose to continue to use voter certificates on election day to maintain distance between the voters and the poll pad operators. These were not ideal conditions, and to be frank, it was absolutely exhausting for everyone involved. I personally felt the weight of my decisions pressing down on me as I put people that I care about into the path of potentially fatal virus. The bravery and dedication I witnessed from my employees was remarkable, and they should all be commended as the heroes that they are. Early on, we realized the best way to facilitate voting during a pandemic was to encourage folks to vote through the mail. Although this option has been available for years, it has not been popular, so historically we don't dedicate a lot of resources to it. That changed during this election as we received a record-breaking 14,000 absentee ballot applications. I didn't have the resources or the space to issue that many ballots without moving the operation outside my office. Luckily, the Secretary of State's office was able to send absentee ballot applications to every active voter and also paid to have the ballots printed and mailed from a central vendor. There were problems with those solutions. I would have preferred to send those applications to the voters' mailing addresses rather than their residence addresses from the start. And the ballots from the Secretary of State's vendor took between 7 and 10 days to be delivered to the recipient after my staff processed the applications. Towards the end, we started sending them out from the office. However, an imperfect solution is light years better than no solution at all, and I'm grateful that the state provided enough financial support for my department to facilitate the rest of the process. Election day would not have gone as smoothly as it did without the push for absentee ballots through the mail, and it would have gone even smoother if more voters had taken advantage of that option. Not every county can say this, but we stayed caught up and were able to work with voters who had issues to ensure they received their ballots in time to return them. We installed 5 drop boxes throughout Bartow County to give voters a convenient and secure option to return their ballots to us without using the postal service or coming to the office during normal business hours. We even have an account with the post office to automatically apply postage to applications that were mailed without stamps. We took every reasonable step to ensure anyone who wanted to could successfully vote through the mail. But there were those who preferred to vote in person despite our warnings, or had to vote in person for a variety of reasons. But before I talk about in-person voting, I'd like to discuss implementing a new voting system. You have to start with good documentation, forms, and procedures. I chose to build on what the Secretary of State's office and the voting system vendors started and wrote my own quick reference guides, forms, and related procedures for the pilot in November of 2019, and I continue to use those documents to this day. I've also freely shared them with any county who wanted to use them with words of encouragement to edit and change them to fit their own operations. After you have your procedures, you drill them into the poll workers through repetition by giving them as much hands-on experience as you can before Election Day. Through this training and on Election Day, I've discovered that my procedures aren't perfect, but they're getting better with every election we conduct. COVID-19 changed the training plan for most of the state. We were fortunate to participate in the pilot, and as a result, almost every poll manager or system manager had some sort of hands-on experience with the voting system, even though it was over 6 months ago. We also started our training for March early, and almost everyone who worked in June, who was not a new hire, received hands-on training on either the poll pads or ballot marking devices and scanners in February and March. Unfortunately, I avoided in-person training for June and instead relied on the Zoom video conferencing service as a training platform. While it worked great for lecture classes, it left something to be desired for equipment training. But it was the best solution we had, so it's what we used. That's why I'm so proud of my poll workers. They pulled off Election Day with 3 months old hands-on training and a refresher course through Zoom. The new hires have never received a single in-person class from me, and it was an amazing accomplishment. And just imagine what Election Day would have looked like had we been able to do the training right. But it's not just about poll work. It's not just the poll workers that be trained, it's the voters as well. Every person you demonstrate the system to before Election Day is one less person you have to answer questions for on Election Day, and that helps the process move faster. Part of the reason that we moved slower than normal on the 9th was that so many people, it was some people's first time seeing the voting system, and we had to answer questions about how to insert a card, remind them to pick up and review their printed ballot, and stop them from walking out the door with it. This will get better with time and experience. Anyone who voted in person in June will know exactly how the system works in November. Another reason I think we were successful is that we tried to plan for the unexpected. We sent emergency ballots to the polling places. We sent emergency spots to the polling places, including paper ballots, a backup electors list, and procedures for what to do if the equipment failed. We even had another county department act as a call center to deal with all the voters who were issued an absentee ballot and through the mail, but chose to vote in person, which took pressure off my staff on Election Day so we could support the polls. All this ensured we were able to keep the process moving no matter the circumstance. But even though I think we had a successful primary election under the current circumstances, things will have to change before the election this November. What worked for a smaller turnout election will not work for the 2020 general election. We must refine our procedures and clarify our documentation so the poll workers' jobs are as streamlined as possible. We have to be sure that we have emergency procedures in place that will prevent equipment failures from becoming election failures. We also need to focus on infrastructure. We need to recruit and train more poll workers who are willing to put themselves at risk so we can fully staff our polling places, even if we're still struggling with the pandemic. Specifically, we need more tech-savvy people who can help troubleshoot issues with the system. We also need to look at our polling places and split and move them as appropriate. If we can't guarantee we can use a facility during a pandemic, we need to find a location that we'll be able to use. I wouldn't normally advocate changing vote locations in the middle of an election cycle, but these are unique circumstances. We need to heavily encourage voting before Election Day and combat misinformation about the absentee by mail process so that more voters are willing to use that option. We also need funding from all levels to make this all happen. I have the great fortune of a commissioner's office that prioritizes funding for my department, but the financial hardship of a general election during a pandemic cannot be borne by the counties alone. I truly hope that the worst is behind us, but my job is to plan for worst case scenarios. No matter what the general election, no matter what, the general election must happen on schedule in a transparent manner that the public can trust, and everyone's voice must be heard. And before I take any questions, just to address one that came up in the previous speaker, there is one step in between, at least one of the BMDs that I used, between a printer jam and the and to be able to say I want to print another ballot, and that's that the poll worker has to approach the machine with an access card and put in a password. So we have another level of security there as well. But that's everything I've got. If y'all have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Representative Turner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. I just want to, the last comment you made there about the security code, in the demonstration that I saw, they did not have to enter that. And as a matter of fact, the poll worker is never notified that that's something that's happening. It's happening behind the privacy screen. To simulate this paper jam, all you have to do is basically place your finger in the front of the output as it's printing, give it a little bit of resistance. The HP printer basically jams at that point. You press a button on the printer, it finishes printing that ballot. It prints a second ballot thinking it hadn't finished the first. And then there is a prompt on the screen saying, have you cleared the paper jam? Would you like to print another ballot? And then the voter, without interaction with anybody else, very privately presses that button and they have their third ballot. I saw this with my own eyes.
I'm gonna have to go visit my neighbors because excuse me. I'll have to go visit my neighbors because I did exactly that demonstration in my poll worker training sessions to show them how to clear a paper jam and the dangers of exactly that happening. And every time it asked for a poll worker card and PIN.
Thank you. I think we'll probably be able to reconcile that as we move forward. I'm sure both of you are speaking accurately to the best of your knowledge. Let's see, Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. How much do poll managers and poll workers make per hour in your county? And then secondly, is that set by the Secretary of State or does it vary from county to county?
Well, each county sets their own training or their own pay rates. In Bartow, a manager makes between $200 and $275 for the day of work. Assistant manager between $200 and $225, and then my clerks make $12 an hour. For in-person trainings, $20 for showing up, plus $10 an hour for however long the training session takes. Virtual training is a $20 flat fee. And to give you an average for, well, going into March, all the poll workers received around 6 hours of training. Well, between 4 and 6.
So how much did you say the poll workers make? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
$12 an hour for clerks. I apologize, $12 an hour.
$275 for the day, I believe he said.
For poll managers.
Yeah. Can you ask, did you say $12 an hour for the poll workers?
Yeah, so poll managers are $275, poll assistant manager $225, and then clerks are $12 an hour.
Sorry, all that's on me. I'm trying to get it scheduled. Leader Trammell? Aren't you one? Three, sorry.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to talk about the preparation for November 2020. And in your opinion, how important is a robust vote by mail program for the success of the November election?
I think that depends on where we're at with the pandemic at that point. I truly hope we're beyond it by then, but if it's in any way a danger, it's extraordinarily important that we have a robust vote by mail system.
Mr. Kirk, how many total votes did you say you had there in Bartow?
Through the mail or total?
Total.
I don't have that number in front of me. If you give me just 1 second, I can tell you.
But what was the total number of absentees that you said were either requested and remitted?
We scanned about 10,000 absentee ballots. And then our overall turnout was 21,247 votes, was about a 29% turnout.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the testimony. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have one more question. Representative Rick Williams, you know what number you are over there?
12.
There you go.
12. There we go. Thank you. Joseph, good to see you. I have a couple of questions. Do you pick your precinct places?
I do, yes.
Do you inspect those precinct places to make sure there's plenty of room, plenty of electrical outlets and everything before election day?
Not for every election, but definitely the first time we use the location, we do a thorough audit of it and make sure everything's as it needs to be. And then we reach out to the locations ahead of time to make sure nothing's changed.
But the county does that. The Secretary of State's office does not do that.
That's correct. Now, the Secretary of State did pay to have someone come help us with the electrical system, and we appreciate that help. But from this point on, we'll be doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Kirk. I appreciate you being with us today. Next, I know these next two, Ms. Presswood, Mr. Holland with Houston County. Good to have you. Good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
Are y'all ready?
We are.
Well, the floor is yours.
I'm Andy Holland from Houston County. Do have Deborah here. Mostly what I'm going to talk about is the absentee by mail and the effect that the mass mailing had on our county and the preparation for Election Day and after Election Day. Here in Houston County, we have just over 100,000 active registered voters. We processed over 23,000 absentee by mail requests, and we counted over 16,000 by the end of all the scanning. I have a couple of bullet points that I really wanted to talk about as far as the effect the absentee ballot mail out had on the elections as a whole. One, with the sheer volume of mail out applications we received and had to process, and the number of ballots that came back and had to be scanned. The Secretary of State did give us an extra week ahead of time to begin opening and scanning ballots, but we found that it was not enough time based on the staff that we could pull together. We started that first day that we could, the second Monday before the election, but between counting the envelopes, opening the envelopes, batching the ballots in the envelopes, we just found that it was not enough time to have everything scanned by election night. So if we're going to continue with this vote by mail program, if it's going to be as much as it was in June, possibly even more in November, probably even more, I would recommend somehow either the state election board or legislators working on giving us more time to scan ballots, open and scan ballots before Election Day, or either after Election Day, which I'm sure wouldn't be ideal. Everybody wants to know the results sooner than later. We don't want to, postpone getting results any more than we already have. So I would recommend more time to open and scan ballots before Election Day. The second thing I want to talk about that really affected in-person voting, both on Election Day and in early voting, was having to cancel those absentee ballots when people showed up, had requested a ballot, and wanted to vote in person. A lot of people have already talked about it. I'm just going to reiterate pretty much the same thing. If they have to fill out the affidavit to cancel the ballot, the poll worker does have to contact our office to make sure that the ballot was not returned already. It caused a lot of our managers to stay on the phone all day at the precinct. It caused much longer wait time for voters, longer time to process. Fortunately, we did not have very long lines. Our poll workers, our managers, they did a great job getting precincts opened, getting people processed. but it was an issue, probably the biggest issue we had on election day. We didn't have any big equipment failures or anything like that, but the cancellation of absentees and having to call in was a problem. One possible solution that we can think of here in Houston County, the poll pads on election day, when they look up a voter, they will tell you that they will mark the voter as an absentee voter. It does not tell you whether that person early voted or requested a ballot and received it but hasn't returned it, or if they requested it and have already returned it. All this information is available in the state system that we use to enter voter information and track their absentee ballots. If there was a way that information could be displayed on the poll pads for each voter when they are marked as an absentee, specifically say, do they just have a ballot out? Have they returned a ballot, or did they early vote? Could cut down on some of the wait times that the voters experience with the manager having to call us for every single one. Also, with the drop boxes, we did set up 2 drop boxes in Houston County to receive absentee ballots back, one in Perry and one in Warner Robins, pretty much the south and north end of our county. With the drop boxes, we did check it every day. The one problem that we did experience was, we had to check it at 7 p.m. on election day. So at 7 p.m., when we're already in this backlog of counting absentee ballots as fast as we can, we get another several hundred ballots dropped on us right at the end of election day. So if maybe there was a different procedure, maybe a sooner cutoff for the drop boxes, or if we can extend the time that we can start processing and counting absentee ballots, we could be caught up at 7 p.m. on election day, and then it wouldn't be as big a deal. That would be something that we would like to have taken a look at. And then our last concern is general preparation for November. What can we expect? Is the state planning on doing another mass mail out of applications? Are they going to have the vendor mail out the ballots after we process them? Or are we going to be expected to process them? We would like to know as much information as soon as possible so that we can plan accordingly and make sure that our office is able to handle what's going to be the massive turnout in November. And with that, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Ms. Presswood, did you have anything to add? I did have one request, if you could, Mr. Holland. When I visited, I was enlightened as to the absentee ballot process and what all went into sorting and such before you could even count those ballots, and the kind of resources it must have imposed upon you. Can you share a little bit about that process?
Well, just there's 2 things that you have to keep organized. One is after the application is received and processed, it has to be sorted by precinct, and we do it in alphabetical order. And then we run a report to check up what we do each day to ensure that every piece of paper we have got keyed into the system. And then we keep that by polling place and then in alphabetical order, so that when the ballot comes back, that application has to be then pulled, and then the signature has to be checked that's on the ballot affidavit against what they had on their absentee application. And once you pull that, you then have to sort and organize the ballot as well. So with the sheer volume that we got, we had to call in a lot of part-time help, and thank God that we had people that could do it and were willing to do it, to just sit there and file and organize basically 8 hours a day for a month to 2 months, just so that we could stay on top of our daily mail and emails that we were getting every day.
Thank you. Looks like we have a couple other questions, and I didn't mean to jump so quickly, Ms. Presswood. If you have anything to add, please join in. But Ms. Bernal, Representative Bernal, excuse me, I'm sorry, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask you, you were saying that you brought in all those extra workers. Had you budgeted for those workers previously?
No, ma'am, not for, we budget for part-time help, obviously to cover election day poll workers and early voting, people to man the early voting sites that we have. But as far as part-time workers coming in just to help with the absentee by mail process, no, ma'am, that was not budgeted for.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please do.
So who paid for those workers? The county?
The county paid for those workers.
Yes, ma'am.
We actually had to get in touch with the county administrator and then to our county commissioners and let them know the situation that we was in. And in order to meet the deadlines, we had to have some help.
Right.
And they agreed.
Ms. Deborah, did you have anything else that you wanted to?
I did want to add, as the code is written, it's asking that you batch the envelopes and you also batch the ballot itself. I never understood why you needed to batch the envelope. And that was a concern because you're trying to keep up with the envelopes and also you're trying to keep up with the ballots. You could always go back to find the ballot, but why do you need to match the ballot with the batch?
Thank you. And there was one other question, I think, when I was there that jumped out at me. I thought maybe I could ask. It was regarding the differences in the ballots requested from you and I guess the requests that went out statewide. Were there differences in those two ballots? Do I recall that correctly?
No, there were differences in the package that went out. It confused a lot of voters. Ballot packages that were received that were mailed from the vendor. Instead of having, if you've ever gotten an absentee ballot, what you get is inside your envelope, you'll have your ballot, a sheet of instructions, a large envelope with your oath on it, and a smaller inner envelope. So when you vote, fold up your ballot, put it in the inner envelope, put that envelope in the bigger envelope, sign it and send it back. That is the normal package that we mail out. What happened with the vendor was they decided instead of sending the small inner envelope, it was just a folded sheet of paper. And the instructions were not updated in the package that went out. It still said that the voter should have 2 envelopes to put their ballot in. We did receive numerous calls on that. Voters were very confused about that. So either, going back to sending an actual inner envelope if we're going to use the vendor again, or updating the instructions so that it's clear that it's a sheet of paper and then the outer envelope would cut down on a lot of confusion and phone calls.
That answered my question. Thank you so much. Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question from a few of us. Actually, we want to know this. You mentioned before that when voters show up and they want to vote in person and they say that they did not receive their absentee ballot, you had to make a call to make sure that that was true. Is that just a process that you all use, or is that a requirement that you make a call?
If the voter does not have the ballot in their hand to turn into the poll manager and has to sign the affidavit, it is required in the official code of Georgia to contact the Board of Registrars, 21-2387.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you coming in. Did y'all have anything further to add?
No.
No, I'm good.
Well, thank you again, both. I appreciate it. And it was good to see you last week.
Good to see you. Thanks for having us.
We have Mr. Balky Vu, DeKalb County Board of Elections member. Mr. Vu, you with us?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. How are you?
Hey, good to see you again. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for affording me an opportunity to share my experience and thoughts with you. I'd like to give a special shout out to you, Mr. Chair, for you and I have had the pleasure of serving together on a state board of the technical college system over some years in the past. We certainly miss you there.
It was my honor to serve with you, sir. Thank you so much. I miss y'all.
Well, of note too, I want to send a special note of thanks to Representative Nguyen for soliciting my perspective on the recent primary elections. So below are some of my thoughts based on my role as the Vice Chair of DeKalb County's Board of Elections. As you all may or may not know, DeKalb County has close to 530,000 registered voters. And in this past primary, we had a turnout rate of 36%, coming out to roughly 192,000 voters who cast their ballots. In addition, I'd like to note that voting in elections can be over-discussed in our household at certain times because my wife actually serves on the State Elections Board and at one time was the Assistant Director of Elections for then Secretary of State Kemp. So as you may have heard in previous testimony from our fellow citizens, for many who exercised their right and sacred duty to vote last week, both in person and those who voted in absentia, their efforts ran the gamut of experiences and emotions. To summarize, we essentially had two major elections wrapped into one primary round on the tail end of a pandemic in the midst of a high energy election cycle. Based on the information many voters shared with me over the course of the past week, it basically boiled down to issues with the system, the process, and the personnel component for each step of voting. Whether it's from the front end, which is the voter registration process, to absentee voting, to early in-person voting, and ending with the day of voting process. First, I'd like to emphasize to you that all elections departments essentially have three masters. The first is we are answerable to our citizens. The second is to our county government, which controls our purse strings. And finally, to state law and the State Elections Board, because they're the ones who they issue our guidelines and our scope of work. To start voting is such a highly regulated process that's governed by an overlapping set of laws, from the Federal Voting Rights Act, the VRA, to the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, which is UOCAVA, and to the National Voter Registration Act, the NVRA. We essentially had a new system used widely for the first time statewide. And when the PPP was pushed back from March and combined with the general primary, it created a chain of events that led to where we ended up into the wee hours last week. Here, I'd like to always quote from former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, and that was that we did not know what we did not know. So now I have a process that I've submitted my public comments, but to me, you have four phases of the election cycle. You have voter registration, onto absentee balloting, onto early in-person voting, and finally to the day of voting. And within each four of these steps, you have the components of the system, the process, and the personnel. Well, I'd like to address the system first. The system in this run round, it encountered enormous stress from the incredibly high interest in absentee ballot requests in the county and throughout the state. The updates on the MVP platform, certainly as the Secretary of State has mentioned, we had to update that daily throughout the state. There were also voters who had problems attempting to change their addresses online, even with the online voter registration system, which is the OLVR. And within the system, there were many voters who did not even receive their absentee ballots, even though they had submitted the request much earlier. I believe having a third-party out-of-state vendor certainly didn't help in terms of mailing delays. I'm sure this posed a problem even for those who had to access PO boxes or had rural addresses. Here in DeKalb, for the 150,000 plus DeKalb voters who had asked for absentee ballots, many never received return confirmations and were not even certain the ballots they cast had been received. On to the aspect of the process. As some of my colleagues have mentioned to you, the COVID pandemic certainly was a shock to the system as it forced changes in polling locations and reductions in voting machines per location to practice social distancing. Here in the Decatur Heights community area, we normally would have had 8 to 10 machines in the past to service our local precinct voters. This time it was halved. Many counties also experienced the usual problems with check-in systems, such as some of my colleagues have mentioned about the scanners that slowed things down. Next, I'd like to touch on the personnel issues here. Poll workers simply do not work year-round. Thus, the high level of worker attrition from health concerns resulted in a meaningful loss of institutional knowledge. In addition, the inability for face-to-face hands-on training was an impediment as well. Training this time was conducted virtually. Historically, it was always very important that we had experienced poll workers who worked from election to election since they provided expertise and stability. And when we have to hire new people, it adds additional time and financial pressures on the system. I'd like to note that with DeKalb County, a couple of years back, when our former elections director retired, we were able to bring in Erica Hamilton, who had worked under Secretary Kemp at the Office of the Secretary of State. And so it was a blessing to have her expertise on this. And even then, we still have to face a number of challenges. On the day of voting, there were many instances of long wait times, and some of them were due to the fact that there were voters who showed up on June 9th to vote in person because they were afraid their absentee ballots had not been received and maybe not counted. But oftentimes the poll workers would send them home to look for absentee ballots. Not necessary. There were instances in Gwinnett County where poll workers had to call the main office to cancel absentees. Now that is a limitation we have given a statute that exists within our code, and perhaps we could address that, or obviously the legislature can address that. I suppose what I'd like to address is the fact that many of my colleagues are here today with the opportunity to share their experiences, and I'd like to focus on how we can perhaps make a difference going into August and going into November. What I can tell you is the fact that the people who run elections departments don't wear a Republican hat or a Democratic hat when they put in 70, 80, 90 hours to ensure every Georgian has the right to vote and vote fairly and securely. Thus, given the shortcomings in certain parts of the state, the various stakeholders, I believe, will be sitting down to work together to ensure that the outcome improves in November. The unpredictable nature of when a voter votes is one of the challenges that I believe you all could help in terms of providing feedback as well. So finally, I'd like to just raise a couple of suggestions and solutions, certainly suggestions, at the risk of actually repeating what some of my colleagues have already addressed. And that is, one, how do we streamline this whole absentee ballot request process? The second issue, which I think has to do with human incentives, is how do we encourage early in-person voting? That's where we could really make a difference. The third idea that's come through, and we're trying to think outside the box here, is how do we create quote unquote pop-up voting by sending teams through high density areas for early voting weeks? The fourth suggestion is to, as Mr. Kirk had mentioned, and I believe Ms. Presswood mentioned, how do we increase hiring efforts amongst, let's say, college students? The demographics that would actually help ease the technological understanding, but also it's a low-risk health group. Fifth, and I did hear this from my colleagues, it's basically how to increase the number of locations for high-density areas. And how do we let voters vote perhaps in multiple locations if they have to wait in line to pass a certain amount in one location? How do we do that? And how do we inform them of that? We in DeKalb took a step early on at the end of last year, working with a couple of the commissioners in order to put together a stakeholder working group. And we solicited a group of consultants to help us manage this process. And I'm hoping that that's what we're gonna be able to at least use in order to move forward. And but I've come to the point where I'd love to solicit any of your questions and feedback. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Vu. I am going to, I believe we have Representative Collins has a question.
Yes, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for what you're doing for the good folks of DeKalb County. One of the questions I had, and you brought it up about the poll workers themselves. In your opinion, as far as is there anything that's done to vet these poll workers? I mean, I know some counties are just at the the mercy of those people who step forward to want to do this, but the caliber and skill set of those individuals that are working the poll, some of that might eliminate me from being able to work at a poll because I may not have the skill set necessary to do some of these things. Is that a concern of yours in your county?
It's, thank you, Representative. Yes, it's always been a concern. I believe prior to this year with COVID-19, the concern was evolving from one of experience to one of technological adoption, right? But now with the pandemic, then you have a combination of factors here, and that is extremely why it becomes challenging because not only is it about technological adoption now, but it's also about health risks. It's about the high degree of turnover. As I mentioned, and you all see this in your daily line of work as well as what you see with the work you're doing under the Gold Dome, and that is institutional knowledge is extremely important. And that's something that it helps us communicate the seriousness of elections. And so we're trying our best right here in order to hire the most qualified people. And even then, we had to give you an example. Early on, we wanted to raise the salaries of the poll workers who only work, 3 weeks out of each cycle. So it's not a full-time job, but they, the past pay, I think over the last 5 years, it's been at $12. And we merely want to raise it up to $15, but we also had to take that through the budgeting process within county government. It's extremely tough to find qualified poll workers to work from cycle to cycle at $12 an hour. Hope that answers your question there.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Balki, for your work and for being here today. I have 2 questions. So one is related to what you just mentioned about trying to raise the pay of poll workers to ensure that we are able to hire poll workers who are both qualified but compensate them adequately for their hard work. Do we need additional resources from the SOS to be able to compensate poll workers at $15 an hour? That's my first question.
Yes, Representative Nguyen. So from the budgetary standpoint, the Secretary of State's office is in charge of certain funding capacities. We certainly welcome their assistance if we can to help drive up the demand for qualified workers and push back also at because obviously we have 159 counties and the counties are responsible for the budgeting of resources for our election department. So a combination, I suppose, of county government support and the office of the SOS would be extremely positive outcome for us. Yes.
And then the second question I have is, I know that DeKalb County has still been counting absentee ballots and that the process by which each county has been counting the absentee ballots has taken a different amount of time. Is there a way to streamline that process? And is it up to the discretion of each county elections board to determine how they're counting the ballots?
Yes. So if I can take one step back, as I mentioned, in a county with 530,000 registered voters and close to 200,000 who actually cast their ballots, the ratio of absentee ballots to in-person voting ran at about a 3-to-1 clip. So you basically had about 140,000 130,000 absentee ballots and the remainder being in person. That has shifted the burden of counting ballots from the machines that we pull that we enter on the day of voting, which then it's tabulated and counted that evening, and it shifted to both the front end in terms of how to verify and ascertain as to the acceptance of these absentee ballots. And then also at the back end, we actually have to go through a vote review panel. And the vote review panel last week, after we already took a week of opening up absentee ballots, but it took the vote review panel an extra close to a week in order to go through one by one ascertain the identity, the authenticity of each ballot for us to actually scan it and then count it. That is something that, and I highlighted my hope that somehow we can incentivize early in-person voting. Early in-person voting, we only had close to 25,000 citizens who actually cast their ballots in the 3 weeks prior to the day of voting. And imagine if we could actually get another 50,000, another 100,000 citizens to actually come and vote in those 3 weeks, in that 3 week span. I believe that would be enormously helpful for the system. One of my colleagues has said that we don't believe that we're going to get the final tallies for this election, given the high amount of absentee ballots that we're seeing in June. So we're trying to find solutions to an enormous challenge there.
Thank you. You have one more question, if you don't mind, Mr. Vogt. Here's Representative Gullett.
Thank you, Mr. View. I appreciate your service on the Board of Elections in DeKalb County. Before I was elected here to the legislature, I also served on a Board of Elections for my county. And it's an experience that most people have no idea how the sausage is made at the Board of Elections and all the work that goes into the members. This is really just as we go through this process of trying to figure out ways that we can make elections better and find the problems that are happening with elections. People like you who have insight into DeKalb County is very appreciative, into Fulton County. One of the things that I have found is, as we've begun to talk about these issues, we've had a difficult time, at least I have personally had a difficult time with getting counties, DeKalb County specifically, but that was one of the issues, but getting them to answer questions related to even what precincts had trouble in order to do an open records to find poll workers in those precincts. So the level of transparency that we can get with the different counties, and not just DeKalb, there's multiple there, but being able to work with us in order to make this better. Anything you can do at the Board of Elections to encourage us to work together better would be awesome. I think that would be very helpful to what this board is charged with doing, or this committee is charged with doing. So that wasn't really a question. It was more just we could use your help in that regard, and also use your input that you've provided us in order to make elections go smoother here in Georgia. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, thank you, Representative. And certainly I take that to heart. It is, to me, a sacred duty. So I appreciate your input there.
Mr. Vu, Balke, if you will, call me Shaw. It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your testimony. Hope we get to visit again here soon.
Likewise, and wish the best of safety and health to you all. Many thanks.
Same to you, sir. All right, we have one final and last but not least, I guess, bit of testimony from Miss Lori Wood. She's the Board of Elections Chair in Walton County. Miss Wood, did you hang on with us? I know we ran a little bit long, but if you're there, we would very much appreciate hearing from you. And the floor is yours, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I was going to say good afternoon, but good evening, Chairman and Committee. My name is Lori Wood, and I'm the chair of the Walton County Election Board. Just a little bit of my background. I actually was a student poll worker way back when. 2003, I actually got nominated to be on the board when it was created, and I became the chairperson in 2018. Walton County has about 70,000 registered voters. We have only 4 office staff, 21 precincts, and 2 advanced voting locations. So we are not as big as DeKalb County. I think that the theme is very similar among everybody that has spoken here today. I would like to add, though, that we did have our January inspections of our precincts. by that third-party vendor that the Secretary of State had hired. We finally received back, I think it was probably in April, end of March, in April sometime, that we received back our results, and all, as far as the electrical, everything was fine. I think the only one issue was a handicap accessible ramp was not easily accessible at one church. You could get to it, but you had to go around the back of the church. So that was one thing different that we had going for us. As far as the absentee ballots are concerned, it tied up so much work in our office. You know, the chairman of the Board of Commissioners wanted everybody to rotate. They wanted, you know, half of your staff to work from home this day and half to work in the office, and just everybody rotate. And so we abided by that as long as we possibly could, taking, you know, everything home with us as far as the applications and things like that. We ended up getting, it was 16,550 ballots that were mailed out. So we received that many applications, but we only received back in 11,246. So a lot of work. I mean, I can't imagine it being more than that. It was just crazy. We had to hire temps to come in there. At any given time, we had anywhere from 4 to 10 temps in there. I was in there working. Another board member was working. It was just crazy. And one thing that I kept hearing among the office was that all of the paperwork kept changing. Like it would change daily almost. So, you know, how can we train people if things are changing and trying to get it out? And, you know, we had the training back in February because of the March, you know, election, but closer, you know, once the pandemic hit, we had to do the virtual training. So that kind of put a damper on all of that. A couple issues that we had last minute, 2 weeks before the election, we had an entire precinct quit because of the pandemic. They all decided they didn't want to work. So we had to staff that precinct. And then worse than that was we had the week before the election, we had one precinct just tell us they didn't want to do, well, they didn't want to hold the election anymore. So we had to go out down the street. Thank goodness we found another location and they were welcoming. They just let us come in and they're going to do it permanently. So that's great news for us. As far as training, I just wanted to hit that briefly. You know, our office only got, I want to say 2 to 3 days of training themselves. So for us to train 200 poll workers, it was hard. It was difficult. And then, you know, at the time, it was in February when we did the in-person training, and we had not even received all the equipment yet. So that was not helpful. Now we did call in the poll managers and had like a 2-hour paperwork training the week before the election on June, you know, the end of May. So for the June 9th election. As far as, you know, things that we've learned that we would like to implement, as far as the absentee goes, because of all the phone calls that everybody's talking about, you know, from the precincts to cancel ballots, you know, we needed a call center. We had precincts who could not get through to the office, and they would call and call and call, but our phones, I was there, the phones rang off the hook all day long. So that would be one thing we would need to implement. And then we also talked about an area poll manager, meaning like because we have 21 precincts and they are spread out. I mean, Walton County is a big county. So, you know, we talked about somebody being over 4 precincts or 3 precincts, and then they would just move, you know, because if we get a phone call from somebody on the other side of Loganville, it takes 30 minutes to get up there from where we are in Monroe. So that would be helpful for us. As far as equipment issues, we did have some poll pads that would not work. And from what we could understand, that they didn't get uploaded. The information, I think a few weeks before, when everything was needing to be uploaded to the poll pads and you were supposed to upload them one at a time, they just, I don't know, the upload didn't work. It didn't shut down the precinct or cause the precinct not to open, because we did have other poll pads, but we had to go out, we had to get it updated, and then we had to, get it working. So we did have one scanner issue that was down for about 60 ballots. And so the ballots were just manually dropped in, which that's the protocol. But that got fixed. And then I think there was a couple issues of where the BMDs would not start up. And then I believe those got fixed. Our tech was a huge help. She went out, she was going out just like we were going out to the precinct. So we needed about 5 of her. So that's about it.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you for hanging in there with us. We've been late. I think we have one question from Representative Shannon, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question about the locations. You mentioned that a week before, the location that you were going to have the election in is pulled out because of COVID. And I know in DeKalb, we had about 20 precincts that changed, pulled out last minute because of COVID. Do the locations get any type of stipend or anything for hosting, an election? So for example, if you're having it in a church, do they get a stipend or anything for
Yes, they do.
Election in the church to take care of sanitation and all that after people have been in there voting? And then the second thing is, they sign a contract or anything, or is it just kind of like when you have something in a library, it's out of niceness that they let you have it?
Well, this was the first time we had actually created a contract, and another board member was actually calling and she needed that contract from them. And that was one of the reasons, they didn't sign the contract. We had just implemented this. So, yeah, but as far as getting paid, yes, they do get paid. And a part of all of this, us doing this was that we had the poll workers do a thorough cleaning before they left. Like, that was part of the agreement.
You're saying this is the first year for contracts?
Yes. That we would actually get them to sign something more than just a verbal. I mean, we created, a more of a legal type contract.
Thank you.
Ms. Wood, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, I mean, we're obviously not a humongous county, but, we always have well-run elections. Our office is, the girls that work in the office are great. And, this was really no different. I mean, there were struggles, there were issues, but we got through it.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for what you do. And thank you again for being with us today and your testimony. And thanks again to everyone for their testimony. It's been a long afternoon, as Ms. Wood put it, early evening. Just a couple of quick announcements for those that are in fact left. We have a email address for any kind of additional testimony that the public would like to submit based on some of the restrictions that we have and the limited amount of time and space. There were over 30 names submitted for today's hearings. We got to 16. That email address is gaff@house.ga.gov. And do want to say a quick thank you to Justin Speck. Did a wonderful job with the technology, and Molly, you did an amazing job helping put this together. Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you to the committee members for the line of questioning today. Appreciate your involvement, appreciate what you did, and appreciate you hanging in there for the amount of time that you did today. We do have another set of hearings scheduled for Tuesday. Should be the same time frame. Hopefully not quite as long. Should be a shorter day. Y'all have a great evening. Thank you once again. We stand adjourned. gaff@house.ga.gov.